Welcome to Earthology. Tonight, we drift into the deep, not into the measurable or the known, but into something older than memory, something that hums beneath the skin of the earth itself. Let the world grow quiet for a while. Let the sound of waves take the place of thought. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of sight, the ocean glows with ancient light. Somewhere beneath it, perhaps, a city sleeps. They called it Atlantis. Imagine you are standing at the edge of the sea at dusk. The tide moves softly around your feet. The air tastes faintly of salt and distance. The horizon is a thin line between water and sky, the boundary of everything you've ever known. And then you imagine, below that line, a world hidden by depth and darkness. Columns of marble, veiled in coral. A city built in circles, each ring of land and water turning like the geometry of a dream. What if it was real? What if it still is? The first whisper of Atlantis comes to us from a man of reason, Plato, 2,500 years ago. He wrote of a story already ancient in his time. He spoke of Solon, the lawgiver, who traveled to Egypt and heard from priests of a great island that once lay beyond the pillars of Heracles, the narrow strait we now call Gibraltar. They said this island was vast, greater than Libya and Asia combined, and its people were strong, intelligent, and prosperous. They built temples and harbors and canals, and they ruled over distant lands with ships that crossed the open sea. But pride grew, and balance faltered. The story ends in tragedy, a single day and night of misfortune, when the island of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea and vanished. To Plato, the story was not mere legend. It was a mirror, a parable about the rise and fall of civilizations, about how power and virtue drift apart. Yet, over centuries, something in that story escaped philosophy and took root in imagination. Atlantis became more than a moral tale. It became a memory we never lived. The ocean keeps secrets well. When you descend beneath the surface, the sound of the world above disappears. The deeper you go, the more ancient it feels. Pressure builds, light fades, and the colors of the surface dissolve into blue, then indigo, then black. Down there, the earth remembers everything. The seafloor is not still. It shifts, it breathes. Mountains rise, valleys sink, continents drift. What seems eternal from above is always changing below. So when we ask, could Atlantis have been real? The answer hides in motion, in the living geology of the planet. There were ages when the sea stood lower than it does today, when vast plains now underwater were part of the dry world. There were times when volcanoes tore open the crust and built new islands overnight. Whole civilizations have risen and disappeared with these tides. Doggerland once stretched between Britain and Europe, a green land that fed hunters and gathered rivers, now lost beneath the North Sea. The island of Santorini, once called Thera, erupted in fire and ash around 1600 BCE. An explosion so vast that it reshaped the Aegean, darkened skies across the Mediterranean, and ended the Minoan civilization. Some say this was Atlantis, that Plato's tale remembered a real disaster, passed down through story until fact became myth. Others look farther west to the Azores, where seamounts rise like the bones of a sunken land. Others still imagine the Caribbean or Antarctica before the ice. Each theory is a tide, rising and falling, never resting. But maybe the question is not where Atlantis was, but what it means that we keep searching for it. The ocean floor is vast, larger than all the continents combined, and we have seen less of it than the surface of the moon. It is entirely possible that ruins of forgotten coasts lie buried there. Not marble palaces, but stone walls, harbors, temples reclaimed by coral. Yet what draws us is not proof, but memory. Something deep in us feels that we have lost something beautiful, something wise. Atlantis, perhaps, is that ache given shape. If you listen closely to the sea, you can almost hear it breathe. Whales hum across distances greater than nations. Currents carry warmth from the equator to the poles, stitching climates together like threads of a living fabric. Beneath it all, hydrothermal vents pulse with heat from the planet's heart, feeding ecosystems that never see the sun. It is a world that does not need us, but that remembers us in its own way. Every civilization leaves traces: pollen in sediment, carbon in the air, iron in the crust. If Atlantis once existed, the ocean would know. It keeps all things quietly. Imagine drifting down now, past the reach of light. The water grows colder, the color deepens. Particles float around you like dust in a forgotten room. Shapes emerge, pillars draped in kelp, arches half buried in sand, statues staring upward with eyes of coral. Maybe this is what remains of Atlantis, a city built in harmony with the sea, slowly becoming one with it again. The marble no longer gleams, but glows softly under a film of algae. Fish weave through the columns like thoughts through a dream. Every ruin becomes a reef. Every silence becomes a song. We do not know what the Atlanteans, if they ever lived, believed. But imagine them for a moment, not as conquerors or gods, but as people. People who understood the rhythm of tides, who measured time by the turning of moons, who built their homes in circles to mirror the pattern of ripples on water. Perhaps they believed the sea was alive, not a force to dominate, but to honor. They might have studied the stars not for power, but for peace, tracing patterns that reflected the geometry of their world. Their architecture could have been a dialogue between land and water, bridges of marble spanning canals, gardens fed by salt-tolerant plants, light filtered through crystalline roofs that captured the color of the sea. And maybe they had philosophers of their own, who warned that balance is fragile, that when a people forget their place in the order of things, the earth remembers. Plato's tale tells of gods punishing pride, but perhaps it was nature itself that shifted. A fault line trembling, a volcano waking, a wave rising higher than the tallest temple. The city would have shaken, its concentric harbors flooding one by one. As people looked toward the horizon and saw it vanish behind walls of water, then came silence. The ocean, once their friend, reclaimed them. There is something deeply human in this story, this rhythm of creation and loss. Civilizations grow like coral, reaching upward toward light, and when they fall, new life builds upon the bones of the old. The sea does not destroy so much as transform. The ruins of Atlantis, if they exist, would not be cold or empty, but blooming, covered in soft corals, anemones, and sea fans swaying like ancient banners. The marble steps would be home to octopus and eel, the grand plazas turned into meadows of sand and light. The myth of Atlantis persists because it speaks to our deepest truths, that we rise, we fall, and we are remembered by the earth in ways we cannot see. It tells us that no empire is eternal, that even beauty can drown, and that from every ending comes another form of life. In this way, Atlantis is not just a lost city. It is a mirror of us, of what we build, what we lose, and what we dream might return. If you close your eyes now, you might still see it. Towers shining through clear water, gardens drifting like clouds of color, streets where light ripples, as though the sun still touches them. Somewhere, deep below, that city sleeps, or perhaps it never did. Perhaps it lives in us, in the part of the human heart that remembers the ocean not as danger, but as home. The story of Atlantis begins not in the sea, but in the mind of a philosopher sitting beneath the Mediterranean sun. Plato, writing in the 4th century before our time, sought to understand not just the world around him, but the deeper nature of truth itself. He spoke through dialogue, through the gentle rhythm of voices asking and answering, exploring the essence of justice, knowledge, and the soul. And within 2 of his works, the Timaeus and the Critias, he planted a seed that would outlive empires, the tale of a lost island that once ruled the world. In those dialogues, he described a conversation between the philosopher Socrates, the statesman Critias, and others. They discussed the ideal state, the balance between wisdom and power, between order and chaos. And in that conversation, Critias shared an ancient memory passed down from Solon, one of Greece's wisest lawgivers. Solon, he said, had traveled to Egypt centuries earlier. There, in the temples of Sais, he spoke with priests who kept records older than Greek memory, inscribed on stone and guarded through flood and fire. Those priests told of a time when a great island lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. It was a vast and wondrous land, they said, home to a mighty people who built their world in harmony with both sea and sky. Plato described their city as a series of concentric rings, alternating circles of land and water, connected by bridges and canals. At the center rose a hill crowned with a shining temple to Poseidon, god of the sea. Around it spread harbors filled with ships, gardens rich with fruit, and homes built from stone that glimmered red, black, and white. The Atlanteans, he wrote, were blessed with abundance: gold, silver, ivory, and every gift the earth could give. They lived in peace for generations, guided by laws of fairness and wisdom, their souls uncorrupted by greed. But as time passed, something shifted. The divine spark within them dimmed. Pride took root, and the balance between virtue and desire began to crumble. They turned their gaze outward, seeking conquest instead of understanding. Their ships crossed the known seas, their armies reached into distant lands. And so the gods, seeing their hearts grow heavy with arrogance, decided to cleanse the world of their excess. In a single night of storms and trembling earth, the island of Atlantis sank beneath the waves and was lost forever. To Plato, this story was more than myth. It was an allegory, a meditation on the fragility of civilization and the eternal rhythm of rise and fall. Yet something in the way he told it, the clarity of its details, the geography, the genealogy of kings, gave it a strange power. It did not sound like a parable. It sounded like memory. And perhaps that was his genius. Or perhaps it was something deeper, the possibility that myths are not invented, but remembered. If you sit beside the sea long enough, you begin to understand why such stories endure. The ocean has always been both mirror and mystery. To the Greeks, it was the realm of gods and monsters. To the Egyptians, the primeval flood from which all creation rose. To the Polynesians, it was a living pathway, a field of stars upon water. Every culture, at some point, has told of a flood, of a lost land, of something once bright that slipped beneath the tide. Maybe these are fragments of the same memory, retold in different tongues. Maybe Atlantis was never one place, but many, a symbol carried forward from one dawn of humanity to the next. Modern historians debate endlessly whether Plato's tale was invention or inheritance. Some say he crafted it entirely as a moral lesson, a perfect counterpart to his ideal city described in the Republic. Others suspect he drew upon older stories, Egyptian, Minoan, or even whispers from the deep prehistory of the Mediterranean world. In Plato's own words, Solon had intended to write a poem about Atlantis, but never did. That alone suggests the tale had life before the philosopher gave it form. And so we are left with questions that linger like waves against a distant shore. Could there have been a real event, a catastrophe that inspired the story? Could memories of volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and floods have woven themselves into the fabric of human storytelling, resurfacing again as Atlantis? If so, then the myth may be less a fantasy than an echo, the Earth's own history told through human breath. There is a quiet poetry in how we keep returning to it. Every generation rediscovers Atlantis in a new place. For some, it lies in the Aegean, near Santorini, where the Minoan civilization once thrived before a volcanic eruption around 1600 BCE. For others, it rests beneath the Atlantic near the Azores, or off the coast of Spain in the submerged plains of Donana. Some point toward the Caribbean, to strange underwater formations off Bimini, or even to the frozen heart of Antarctica. None have proven true, yet none have fully faded either. The idea itself endures, like a tide that refuses to turn. But maybe that's because the real Atlantis does not need to be found. It lives in what the story represents, the dream of a balanced world, the warning of its loss, and the sense that somewhere in time, humanity achieved harmony with the earth. In that way, Atlantis is not gone. It is waiting as an idea, a direction, a memory that pulls us toward gentleness. If you close your eyes, you can almost see Solon listening to the Egyptian priests, their voices echoing through the stone halls of Sais. They spoke of cycles, of ages when gods and humans lived together, of floods that came and went, of civilizations that rose from the mud only to sink again. They said that humanity is like a child that forgets, that each age must rediscover itself after the sea wipes the slate clean. Maybe Atlantis was one of those ages. Not the first, not the last. Just one heartbeat in the long rhythm of the planet. Plato never finished his tale. The dialogue of Critias breaks off mid-sentence, just as the story reaches its height. The manuscript simply ends, as if swallowed by the very silence it described. It is one of history's strange coincidences, or perhaps its quiet jokes, that the story of the lost city is itself incomplete, missing, submerged. Scholars have wondered for centuries how he meant to end it, but maybe this is the only ending it ever needed. The myth itself sank, leading ripples for us to follow. The power of Atlantis lies not in proof, but in resonance. It touches something older than logic, a longing for the perfect world we suspect once existed, or that we might one day create again. We are drawn to its symmetry, its promise of wisdom and beauty, and its tragedy of loss. To imagine Atlantis is to imagine our own reflection, a civilization at peace with itself, undone not by nature, but by forgetting how to live within it. When Plato looked out at the sea, he saw a surface that hid more than it revealed. He knew, as we still do, that the ocean is both cradle and grave, creation and erasure. Every wave that breaks carries fragments of what was, and in its retreat, it writes new shapes in the sand. The philosopher's Atlantis endures for the same reason the ocean endures, because it refuses to stay still. Listen now, and the waves tell the same story, again and again. A city of light, a people of wisdom, a fall into silence. The memory of that silence becomes myth, and the myth becomes history, and history becomes the dream you are hearing now. Imagine now the world as it might have been, before the memory of Atlantis was lost. The air softer, the seas calmer, the continents arranged just slightly differently beneath the sky. It is said that Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, out in the wide ocean where the Mediterranean opened to the world. Out there, the sea would have stretched into mystery, a blue so vast it seemed endless, broken only by the shimmer of distant islands and the slow migration of clouds. Plato wrote that the island was larger than Libya and Asia combined, a great continent rising from the deep. At its heart stood a plain of immense beauty and fertility, surrounded by mountains that glowed like bronze in the evening sun. Streams ran from the peaks, feeding rivers that cut through the land like silver threads. The soil was dark and rich, the climate gentle, the seasons balanced between warmth and coolness. It was a place where the natural world itself seemed to cooperate with the human one, where abundance was not taken but given. The island's capital, he said, was built in circles, alternating rings of land and water, connected by channels so wide that ships could pass with sails unfurled. At the center rose a hill, crowned by a temple dedicated to Poseidon, god of the sea, and to Cleito, the mortal woman he loved. From their union came 10 kings, each ruling a ring of the island, each sworn to harmony with the rest. The outer rings were harbors and markets, where traders from distant lands brought goods and stories. The inner rings were gardens, fountains, and quiet sanctuaries where the people could breathe and think. If you imagine it now, you can almost see it. The city glimmers like a jewel set into the palm of the ocean. The canals ripple with sunlight. Bridges arch across the waters, each one lined with trees whose roots drink from both earth and sea. In the streets, light dances across polished stone. The scent of salt and flowers drifts together, inseparable. Every sound, footsteps, laughter, the murmur of the tide, blends into the rhythm of the world itself. Perhaps that was Atlantis' first secret. It was built in imitation of nature's own design. The circle, the spiral, the flow of water, these are not human inventions. They are patterns older than life, older than language. The people of Atlantis, if they truly existed, may have understood this deeply. Their city was not set upon the earth, but within it. Their walls and walkways followed the lines of energy that shaped the planet. They did not defy the sea. They conversed with it. If you could walk through that world, you might notice how everything seemed in balance. Temples of white and red stone shimmered above lagoons of turquoise. Towers curved like shells, reflecting sunlight into the canals. The air carried the hum of water running through aqueducts, cooling the city in the heat of day. Even at night, when the wind fell still, you would hear the faint song of waves echoing through marble corridors. The people would have moved slowly, not from weariness, but from understanding. They lived by the rhythm of tides, by the calm assurance that all things in time return. Geologically, such a place is not impossible. The earth has made and unmade islands countless times. Volcanic ridges rise where tectonic plates diverge, forming arcs of land that bloom and vanish with the centuries. The Azores, for instance, sit atop the mid-Atlantic ridge, a chain of underwater mountains that marks the boundary between the Eurasian and North American plates. There, magma pushes upward, creating islands fringed by cliffs and fertile plains. In another age, when the sea level was lower and the planet's crust less settled, such land might have been vast. A plateau of volcanic stone surrounded by deep trenches, waiting only for time and pressure to reclaim it. Some scientists have suggested that parts of the Atlantic seafloor once stood higher, forming a region that could have supported life and culture. Over millennia, as the plates shifted and sea levels rose, it would have slipped below the waves. The ocean hides its past well. Beneath layers of sediment and coral, beneath miles of dark water, lie the traces of mountains and valleys that once touched the sun. If Atlantis had existed there, in that restless region between continents, its fate would have been sealed not by gods, but by geology. A series of eruptions, earthquakes, or collapses could have pulled entire cities into the sea. The deep ocean trenches that surround the mid-Atlantic ridge tell stories of such violence. Yet from destruction comes renewal. Each tremor births new land somewhere else, new coral, new life. Still, even science cannot erase the sense of myth. When you close your eyes and drift through the idea of Atlantis, what you feel is not catastrophe, but serenity. You sense the hum of a world in perfect motion, where architecture followed the curve of wind and wave, and where the boundary between human and nature was not drawn, but dissolved. Perhaps their ships sailed in silence, gliding across waters so clear that one could see fish swimming beneath the hull. Perhaps they harvested the sea without emptying it, their nets woven not of greed, but gratitude. Maybe they built observatories where scholars traced the stars' reflection in calm lagoons, learning both the heavens and the depths in the same breath. The Atlanteans, as Plato described, lived where 5 zones of the Earth's climate met, a poetic truth that feels symbolic. They stood between extremes, between heat and cold, between sea and land, between heaven and the underworld of the deep. They were, in a way, the world's balance point. And when that balance failed, when pride overtook harmony, the scales tipped back toward the ocean. Even now, when we map the seafloor with sonar and satellites, we find strange shapes that stir imagination. Ridges that look like walls, plateaus like plazas, symmetrical lines etched into stone by currents that mimic the geometry of human design. Our instruments tell us these are natural, the work of fault lines, lava flows, erosion, but the human mind is restless. It cannot help but see memory and pattern. It cannot look at the ocean floor without wondering what lies just beneath the next layer of sand. And so we continue to imagine. We imagine that once, somewhere beyond Gibraltar, stood an island ringed with gold and silver, where the light of dawn struck marble domes and reflected into the sky. We imagine that at night, the stars seemed to gather above it, drawn by the brightness below. We imagine its harbors filled with ships carved from cedar, their sails dyed deep blue to blend with the sea. The scent of burning oil, the music of flutes carried over the water. When you hold that vision long enough, it begins to feel real, not because it must have happened, but because it belongs to something deep within us, the same place that dreams of peace, balance, and beauty. Atlantis, whether island or idea, reminds us of a time when humanity lived as part of the world, not apart from it. And maybe, just maybe, that memory is not entirely fiction. The earth remembers. The crust shifts, the seas rise, but beneath those changes, the patterns endure. Somewhere on the seafloor, there may still be the faint outline of circles, the ghost of canals that once carried light. A city asleep, wrapped in coral, waiting for someone not to find it, but to understand it. In the heart of Atlantis, life moved like water. The city was alive with rhythm, yet never hurried. Every sound, the whisper of fountains, the call of seabirds, the distant hum of the tide, seemed to blend into a kind of music that never ended. The people rose with the first glow of morning, when the sky softened into pink and gold, and the waves shimmered against the white walls of their homes. They built their houses not to defy the sea, but to breathe with it. The walls curved, rounded like the shells that washed upon their shores. The roofs caught the rain, guiding it into channels that fed gardens of herbs and fruit. Every dwelling, no matter how small, was shaped with care, not only for comfort, but for harmony. To live in Atlantis was to live within design that mirrored nature's own patience. At dawn, the harbors stirred first. Sailors and merchants walked along stone quays that glowed in the rising light. The air smelled of salt and cedar, of oil and woven rope. Ships with high, crescent-shaped bows waited for the tide. They were graceful things, vessels carved from the dark wood of the interior forests, bound with copper and resin that shimmered like the scales of fish. Their sails were dyed with deep hues of indigo, their cords strong as vines. The people of Atlantis were travelers by heart and scholars by instinct. They traded with lands across the sea, to the west, to islands now long gone, and to the east, where the shores of known continents began. They carried metals, crystals, dyes, and spices, but what they prized most were stories. Wherever their ships went, they brought back tales of storms, of stars, of creatures that lived where no sun reached. In the marketplaces, those stories flowed like rivers. You would hear them spoken by old mariners with faces browned by wind and salt. You would see them painted on clay jars, carved into the handles of tools, sung by children as they played near the water's edge. Knowledge was not hoarded. It was shared, passed from hand to hand, from voice to ear. The Atlanteans believed that wisdom was like current. If it stopped moving, it grew stale. In the center of the capital, the great temple rose above all else. It was built from a stone that seemed to change color with the light, white at noon, red in the dusk, black in the rain. Inside, the air was cool and still, filled with the faint scent of burning oils and the echo of distant waves. At its heart stood a statue of Poseidon, tall and serene, his hands resting upon a trident whose points shimmered with inlaid orichalcum, the metal that, legend says, glowed like fire. Around him were the carvings of dolphins, horses, and waves, each one polished to reflect the flicker of lamps. But this temple was not only for worship. It was also a place of learning. Scholars gathered beneath its domes to study astronomy, geometry, and the hidden patterns of the world. They mapped the stars, measured the tides, and traced the movement of the moon. They believed that the heavens and the sea spoke the same language, and by listening closely, they could understand both. Their science was not separate from their spirit. To them, every discovery was a form of reverence. To chart a current was to honor the breath of the ocean. To study light was to study the gaze of the gods. Their inventions, intricate devices of bronze and glass, machines powered by wind and water, were built not for conquest but curiosity. They understood energy in a way that feels almost modern. Some say they captured power from crystals, drawing light from the earth itself. Others imagined great mirrors and lenses that gathered sunlight and focused it into beams of warmth. Whether true or myth, the idea remains that Atlantis had found balance, a civilization advanced not only in knowledge, but in restraint. Their cities shimmered with light, yet the night sky remained clear. Their fields flourished, yet the forests still stood. Their mines reached deep, yet the rivers still ran pure. It was not perfection, but a practiced equilibrium. Every resource taken was repaid. Every harvest followed the rhythm of the sea. The people of Atlantis lived with the knowledge that abundance was fragile, that the earth gave, but also remembered. Even their festivals reflected that truth. Once each year, when the ocean reached its calmest phase, the entire island celebrated the festival of the tides. It was a time when all work stopped, and the people gathered along the beaches. They built great fires, danced barefoot in the sand, and sang to the sea. Ships were anchored close to shore, their masts strung with lights that swayed with the wind. Offerings of fruit, grain, and flowers were cast into the waves, gifts of gratitude, not fear. As the night deepened, the ocean responded. The tide shimmered, the foam glowed faintly blue with bioluminescent plankton, and for a moment it seemed as though the sea itself was alive with joy. The people believed that Poseidon was listening, that the spirits of the deep had come to dance among them. It was a night of beauty and remembrance, a reminder that their island, for all its grandeur, still belonged to the sea. And perhaps that was why they thrived for so long. They lived not above nature, but within its embrace. Their architecture followed the shape of currents. Their art captured the movement of wind. Their music was slow, circular, and hypnotic, the rhythm of waves turned into sound. The Atlanteans understood that stillness was not emptiness. It was power at rest. In the inland valleys, beyond the city rings, the fields stretched toward the mountains. Terraces climbed the slopes, green with crops that shimmered in the sunlight. Grains, fruits, herbs used both for food and healing. Water flowed down from the peaks through stone channels, cooling the air and nourishing the soil. Farmers worked barefoot, guided by the stars and seasons. They believed that every harvest carried a memory of the sea, for all rivers eventually returned to it. Children grew up learning this unity early. They were taught to swim before they could read, to feel the pull of tides before they learned the rules of trade. Schools were built near the shore, where teachers spoke of currents, constellations, and the balance between taking and giving. Their lessons were soft, like stories told at twilight, but they carried deep truths. Even the animals of Atlantis seemed at peace. Dolphins followed the ships into harbor, seals rested on the rocks, and birds circled high above the cliffs. The people considered them neighbors, not symbols, not servants, but participants in the same great rhythm. To harm one was to harm the harmony. And yet, beneath all this calm, there was a hum, a quiet warning that all beauty carries within it the seed of its undoing. The Atlanteans, wise as they were, began to look further outward. They sought to expand, to bring their order to distant lands. It began with trade, then with colonies, then with control. Pride crept in like a slow tide. But for now, in this moment, Atlantis still stands unbroken. Its towers gleam in the sun. Its streets hum with gentle life. The sea laps softly against the harbor walls, and the people move as though time itself has slowed to watch. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the breath of a civilization that once lived in perfect rhythm with the earth, a memory of balance, echoing beneath the waves. There is a moment in the life of every civilization when silence begins to thin, when the calm that once carried its people starts to tremble, softly, almost imperceptibly, beneath the weight of desire. For Atlantis, that moment came not as a storm, but as a whisper, the whisper of possibility. The people had learned much from the sea. They had mapped its tides, charted its winds, followed its deep currents to distant horizons. The same curiosity that once made them explorers now drew their gaze inward, toward power itself. Knowledge, after all, is not content to rest. It seeks, it expands, it reaches for more. And so the Atlanteans began to ask questions not only of nature, but of dominion. If they could harness the rhythm of tides, could they not guide them? If they could measure the stars, could they not command the heavens? In the beginning, their ambitions were gentle, even noble. They built machines to study the clouds and mirrors to catch sunlight. They learned how to redirect water, how to shape stone with sound, how to blend metal and crystal into forms that glowed with living light. Their inventions made life easier, cleaner, more radiant. But slowly, the balance shifted. Comfort became expectation. Progress became hunger. The first signs were small. Temples built taller, ships built larger, harvests demanded sooner. The great harbor, once open to all, became a symbol of pride. Statues grew higher, gates thicker. The capital began to gleam too brightly, its marble too polished, its towers too smooth. The people began to measure worth not by wisdom, but by possession. The philosophers warned them. The priests spoke of restraint. The elders told stories of the first age, when all things were shared and simple. But their voices, once listened to like music, began to fade beneath the new hum of ambition. There was a king then, the 10th descendant of Poseidon, ruler of the island's central plain. His name is lost to time, carried away by water and silt, but the stories remember his heart. He was both visionary and dreamer, a man who loved beauty more than peace. Under his rule, Atlantis flourished outwardly like never before. He commanded the construction of canals that stretched across the island like veins of light. He filled them with ships and fountains, built bridges carved with dolphins and wings. The city became a reflection of the cosmos, its streets laid out like constellations, its towers mirroring the movement of the stars. And yet, beneath the brilliance, something delicate began to fracture. Power, even when born from wisdom, invites comparison. Other kingdoms admired Atlantis, then envied it. Traders came from afar, marveling at its wealth. Some spoke of imitation, others of resistance. And the Atlanteans, proud of their gifts, began to believe themselves chosen. They called their city the heart of the earth. They said the gods had placed them there as guardians of balance. Yet in the same breath, they claimed ownership of that balance. What was once reverence became right. What was once harmony became hierarchy. It was not evil that moved them, only certainty, the quiet conviction that they knew best. They built academies where students debated not how to live in rhythm with nature, but how to perfect it. They studied the secret geometry of growth, the mathematics of the sea's pulse, the magnetic lines that laced through stone. Some said they could draw power from the earth itself, heat from deep beneath the crust, energy from the core's silent churn. Others whispered that they had found ways to speak to the ocean, to draw sound and motion from its depths. The air around Atlantis began to shimmer with invention. Nights glowed with lights that never burned out. Water flowed through channels carved from crystal. Machines turned silently in the wind, drawing power from unseen forces. To an observer, it would have looked like paradise. A world at peace, radiant with light, surrounded by gardens and fountains and music. But the people were no longer listening to the quiet pulse beneath their feet. The earth hummed as it always had, soft, steady, patient, but their thoughts now moved faster. The more they built, the more they desired. Cities spread beyond the central island, colonies established across nearby shores. Their ships no longer carried only trade, but command. They began to claim territories under the banner of guidance, to bring order, as they said, to a less enlightened world. And for a time, the world accepted it. The Atlanteans brought irrigation to arid lands, medicine to the sick, navigation to those who feared the sea. But with every gift came a tether, a price unseen yet heavy. Soon the balance began to bend. The outer colonies sent tribute to the capital: gold, grain, gemstones, labor. The once equal islands now stood in orbit around a growing sun. And in the heart of that sun, the king sat upon a throne of orichalcum, surrounded by walls that gleamed too brightly to see beyond. He believed, perhaps sincerely, that he ruled with justice. He saw himself as the steward of divine order, entrusted by Poseidon to keep the world in harmony. But harmony cannot be commanded. It must be felt. It must be lived. And as pride spread, the silence deepened. The philosophers grew quiet. The sailors still sang, but their songs carried a different tone, less wonder, more longing. The craftsmen worked, but no longer paused to listen to the wind. Even the festivals changed. The offerings to the sea grew extravagant, as if gold and jewels could buy forgiveness for the weight of progress. Yet the ocean watched, as it always does, patient, observant, waiting. The first warnings were gentle, subtle tremors beneath the fields, unusual tides at dusk. Fishermen noticed that the dolphins no longer swam so close to the harbor. The seabirds flew higher. The wells grew warmer. Some said it was the earth breathing differently. Others dismissed it as coincidence. The scholars measured, recorded, debated, but their instruments, though precise, could not read the pulse of balance itself. The priests returned to the temple, lighting lamps that had long been cold. They prayed for calm, for a sign from the sea. They spoke to the people of humility, of remembering their origin, of the first covenant made between water and land. But few listened. The markets still rang with laughter. The forges still burned. The king still dreamed of perfection. And yet, deep beneath the shining city, the crust of the earth stirred. Pressure built where it had once flowed freely. The same heat that had given the Atlanteans their light began to shift, restless and unseen. Some say the seers began to dream of waves, others of fire. The stories differ, but all agree on one thing: the island began to hum. Not with music, not with celebration, but with something older, a resonance that came from the bones of the world. Still, life went on. The people danced, the fountains flowed, the ships sailed. But in quiet moments, when the wind paused and the lamps flickered, even the proudest among them must have felt it. That subtle tremor beneath their feet that whispered that all things built too perfectly must one day bend. Atlantis, the radiant heart of the world, had reached its zenith. Every dream realized, every desire fulfilled. But perfection is a delicate state, one that cannot last forever. Somewhere in the deep, the sea was remembering. The sea does not rise in anger. It begins with breath. A long, slow exhale that moves unseen through the body of the world. For months, perhaps years, the people of Atlantis felt it without understanding. The tides came sooner, the rains later. The air seemed heavier, though the skies remained bright. There was no sudden disaster, only small changes that whispered of imbalance. In the fields, The water channels that had always flowed evenly began to shift. Some dried too soon, others flooded without warning. The farmers spoke quietly of restlessness in the soil. In the harbors, the ships rolled more heavily, even when the wind was still. The navigators marked strange variations in their compasses, the faint pull of unseen currents beneath their hulls. The elders remembered stories from the first age, of times when the earth turned within itself, folding land into sea and sea into land. They said the world had a rhythm, and when it changed, the wise listened. But now, few still knew how to listen. The city, shining as ever, refused to see the signs. Its temples glowed with new fires. Its towers gleamed against the morning sun. The hum of machinery and voices filled the air like constant music. The people were too accustomed to light to notice the shadows lengthening beneath it. Yet beneath their feet, the island was stirring. Far below the marble streets and crystal canals, molten stone shifted. Pressure gathered in secret chambers where fire and water met. The seabed trembled, not violently but persistently, as if the earth were murmuring in its sleep. A few scholars noticed the pattern. They recorded tremors, tracked the slow rise of heat in the wells, noted the odd shimmer in the springs that once ran cold. They brought their findings to the court, tables covered in numbers and charts, theories written in fine script. The king listened, patient but unconcerned. To him, Atlantis was eternal. Its greatness had become a kind of faith. You measure the heartbeat of the gods, he said. But remember, the heart does not stop. It only changes its rhythm. The words calmed the court, but not the ocean. Soon after, a storm came, not large, but strange. It appeared from a clear horizon, rising as if summoned from the depths. The sky darkened not with clouds, but with mist that glowed faintly blue. The lightning was silent, the thunder delayed. When the rain fell, it was warm. The people watched from their terraces, uneasy but entranced. Then, just as suddenly, the storm vanished. The sea grew still again. The sun returned, and the air smelled faintly of sulfur. The priests called it a sign. They lit new fires in the temples, poured offerings of oil into the sea. They spoke of Poseidon's gaze, of the need for humility. But the merchants laughed. Their ships had survived. Their goods were safe. The city still stood. To them, it was proof of favor, not warning. And so life continued, though more fragile than before. Days passed into weeks, weeks into months. The harvests faltered. The air thickened with heat that clung to the skin. The wells steamed at dawn. The fish moved further offshore. Still, the people refused to see decay in the mirror of their perfection. One night, deep beneath the temple, a tremor shook the stone foundations. The lamps swayed, water spilled from the pools, and a low, rolling sound filled the halls. Not thunder, not wind, but something slower, heavier, older. The priests fell silent. The sound faded, leaving the air trembling in its absence. It was then that the seers began to dream again. They dreamed of light turning to ash, of towers dissolving into foam, of the sea rising to wash away the noise of men. They spoke of an ancient promise, that the sea would always reclaim what forgot its song. The king heard these dreams and frowned. He did not mock them, but neither did he yield. Atlantis was born from the sea, he said. The sea will not destroy its own child. But even as he spoke, the island's pulse grew faster. The ground trembled more often now, gently but insistently. Cracks appeared along the outer walls, fine as threads but spreading. In the harbor, the water turned cloudy, then clear again, as if breathing. The birds began to leave, first the seabirds, then even the small garden sparrows. Their absence made the morning strangely still. And then came the day the fountain stopped. At first, no one noticed. The city was vast, full of sound and motion. But by noon, the stillness spread. The water that had always flowed through the canals no longer sang. The air grew heavy with quiet. People gathered around the dry basins, touching the stone, waiting for the first trickle to return. None came. The engineers investigated, tracing the channels back toward the mountains. They found that the main reservoir, carved deep into the heart of the island, had fractured. The water had vanished, pulled down into the earth. No one could explain it. The priests spoke of sacrifice. The scholars spoke of geology. The king spoke of rebuilding. But the truth, though unspoken, moved like a shadow through the streets. The island was changing, and not in ways they could control. Still, Atlantis did not fall. Not yet. The next months were a strange twilight, a season of waiting. The air grew hotter, the light sharper. At night, the sea glowed faintly, as if the deep were breathing fire. Some said they saw shapes beneath the waves, great shadows that moved like mountains. Others dismissed it as tricks of reflection. The people adapted, as people always do. They carried water from the rivers. They built new wells. They sang the old songs again, though this time not for celebration, but for comfort. And then, one night, the sky burned. It began with a red line on the horizon, bright as dawn, though the moon was high. The line widened, deepened, became a pillar of light that reached into the clouds. A sound followed, not sharp, but deep, like the groan of the earth turning in its sleep. From the mountains came a glow, slow and molten. The ground shook, and from the sea rose steam so thick it turned the stars to ghosts. The people fled to higher ground, carrying lamps, holding children, whispering prayers to the waves. From the temple terraces, they watched as the ocean began to draw back, further and further, revealing the dark bed beneath. Fish flailed in the sand, coral glistened like bone. The air grew still, the silence unbearable. And then the sea returned, not in waves, but in one vast wall of water. It moved with the weight of the world, folding over itself as it rose. The priests fell to their knees. The king stood silent, his crown glinting in the firelight. The sound was not a roar but a heartbeat, enormous and final. The water struck the harbor first, shattering the ships like toys. It rolled through the lower city, breaking marble like glass. The streets filled with foam, the lamps went dark. The air turned to salt and ash. High in the temple, the priests watched the sea climb the steps. One whispered, "It returns." And so it did. For days, no one knew where the horizon had gone. Smoke, mist, and steam covered everything. The island trembled as if trying to stay above the surface. The mountains cracked. The plains folded. The sea swallowed. Yet even as destruction came, it was strangely quiet, as if the ocean were not angry, but simply reclaiming what had always belonged to it. The last sound the city heard was not thunder, not cries, but the deep, steady hum of the earth itself, drawing breath beneath the sea. And then silence. The sea closed over Atlantis as gently as a sigh. It did not rage, did not roar. It came in silence, the kind that follows a breath too deep to measure. The waves moved with a strange grace, folding light and shadow together, until the sky and the water became one endless mirror. For those few who remained high upon the hills, the last vision of their city was a dream dissolving. The white towers, once bright as moonlight, flickered beneath the rising foam. The marble plazas filled with silver reflections, then vanished entirely. The golden domes shone one final time, a shimmer on the horizon, before slipping beneath the moving veil. The sound of stone cracking echoed faintly, like distant thunder, then faded. The sea rose higher, swallowing the great bridges, the statues, the gardens. The air filled with mist that smelled of salt and smoke. Then came stillness. The ocean, in its vast patience, began to smooth the surface, as if erasing its own memory. What had been streets became currents. What had been music became vibration. The city, alive for millennia, fell silent beneath the weight of water. In the first days after the sinking, the sea was strangely warm. Clouds of silt swirled above the ruins, dimming the sun. Fish circled the newly made depths, cautious and slow, as if sensing something sacred in the quiet. The mountains that had once crowned the island became jagged ridges beneath the waves. The forests turned to drifting shadows. The rivers flowed upward, dissolving into the sea that had reclaimed them. The people, those few who escaped, carried only fragments of what had been. Some found refuge on smaller islands, others on distant shores. They spoke of fire beneath the ocean, of cities that shone like stars and then went dark. Their stories, passed down through generations, became the myths we remember, tales of a world too beautiful to last, a kingdom swallowed by pride and sea. But beneath the surface, Atlantis did not die. It simply changed. In the deep, where sunlight fades and sound moves slower, the ruins settled. Sand fell through the streets like soft rain. Coral found anchor in the cracks of broken marble. Seagrass grew over collapsed temples, its slow rhythm matching the pulse of the tide. The ocean's creatures came, first the small and curious, then the vast and ancient. Octopuses hid in the hollows of fallen statues. Rays drifted through the open arches of drowned palaces. Whales passed overhead, their songs echoing through the empty halls. The city that once sang to the sea was now sung to by it. In the darkness, bioluminescence bloomed. Tiny plankton filled the waters with drifting light, glowing softly over the ruins like candle flames under glass. At night, though night had no meaning there, the ocean shimmered from within, each glimmer a memory, each spark a breath of what once was. The great temple, now half buried in silt, remained. Its columns stood like ancient trees, their roots wrapped in coral, their tops hidden by shadow. Inside, where the statue of Poseidon had once towered, light flickered faintly across the stone face. The god seemed almost alive, his trident broken, his gaze turned downward. Around him, schools of fish moved in spirals, a slow and silent dance. And so, Atlantis became a part of the ocean's body, not lost, but transformed. Its stones were softened, its metals dulled, its colors turned to hues of green and blue. What had been a city of light now breathed in darkness. What had been human creation now belonged to the deep. Years passed, and centuries. Then ages. The ocean forgot the shape of the island. The continents shifted, the currents changed, and the sea floor grew and folded. The world above rebuilt itself. New kingdoms rose, new stories were told. But beneath the surface, the quiet remained. The ocean is a patient keeper. It holds everything, but speaks of nothing. Sometimes, when the earth moves in its long, slow rhythm, the waters tremble above the place where Atlantis once lay. Tiny air bubbles rise from the cracks below, carrying traces of ancient gases, ancient warmth. They drift upward and break upon the surface, unnoticed among the waves. And sometimes, in the stillness of deep-sea trenches, the sound of shifting rock echoes faintly like a heartbeat, a pulse buried in miles of water and stone. Scientists call it geothermal vibration. Poets call it memory. The truth may be both. There are divers who claim to have seen impossible things, walls carved in patterns too perfect to be natural, stones that fit together like thought, steps descending into shadow where no light has ever been. They return with stories, with fragments of coral-covered geometry, with photographs that blur like dreams. The ocean gives nothing away easily. It guards its secrets behind pressure and darkness. It swallows metal and bone alike. It knows that what is remembered too easily cannot be truly understood. But still, the world listens. Every generation rediscovers Atlantis in its own way. Some through science, some through story, some through longing. We look at the sea, and imagine what lies beneath, not because we need proof, but because we sense that something of ourselves is still down there. A reflection, a warning, a hope. In that sense, Atlantis was never lost. It became part of the deep rhythm that shapes every coastline and every life. It became sediment and coral and myth, layered together like the strata of time. It became a mirror through which humanity sees both its greatness and its fragility. The waves that roll across the Atlantic today are not so different from those that once kissed its shores. The same water has circled the earth countless times, carrying particles of that vanished world, minerals, salt, whispers, across the globe. Every drop of rain that falls on us has been, in some form, part of Atlantis. And so, the legend continues, not as history, but as inheritance. Beneath the ocean, the city sleeps. Its streets are quiet, its temples cold, its gardens turned to reefs. But in that stillness, life has returned. The coral glows, the fish move through arches of ancient marble, and the ocean's slow current hums through its ruins like breath. It is said that if one could listen deeply enough, beyond the sound of waves, beyond even the pulse of one's own blood, one might hear the faint echo of Atlantis, not as words, but as rhythm. A pulse in the water, slow and constant, as if the ocean itself still remembers the heartbeat of a forgotten world. Time, in the deep, has no direction. 1,000 years, 1,000,000, all flow together like currents. The past becomes the present dissolves into myth. And there, somewhere beneath the weight of silence, Atlantis endures, not in defiance, but in peace. The ocean has reclaimed what was once its own, yet it does not erase. It transforms. What was marble becomes reef. What was city becomes sanctuary. What was hubris becomes humility. And above, the waves roll endlessly, their rhythm soft and patient. They carry no sorrow, only continuity. The sea, as always, forgives by remembering differently. Beneath that endless motion, Atlantis sleeps, neither lost nor found, but perfectly between. Centuries passed like waves. The world above changed, reshaped by wind, fire, and time. The people who had once spoken of Atlantis grew old and faded, but their words, like seeds carried by the tide, took root in distant minds. The legend survived not in ruins, but in remembrance. Somewhere in Greece, centuries after the sea had closed over that lost world, a philosopher sat beside the water and listened. His name was Plato, and from the ripples of the Aegean, he imagined a story so vast it would echo for thousands of years. He wrote of a great island, beyond the Pillars of Heracles, larger than Libya and Asia combined. He told of a civilization that rose in harmony with nature and spirit, wise, powerful, radiant, until it fell, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. It was a tale meant to teach, a parable of balance and loss. But as with all stories that touch something deep in the human soul, it grew beyond philosophy. It became myth, and myth became memory, and memory became mystery. Plato's words traveled across centuries, carried by scholars, sailors, and dreamers. The world began to search for Atlantis. But perhaps what we have always searched for is not a place, but a reflection, something hidden in ourselves. When we hear the story of a golden city beneath the waves, it awakens something ancient in our hearts, the longing for a perfect world and the sorrow of having lost it. Every culture has its flood, its lost garden, its vanished age of peace. Atlantis is the echo of all of them, a symbol of what humanity remembers when it dreams too deeply. The Egyptians spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time when gods and humans walked together. The Sumerians told of Eridu, the city founded before the flood. The Hindus remembered Dwarka, the sacred city beneath the sea. The Maya spoke of lost lands that sank when the ocean rose. Everywhere on earth, the same story repeats, A golden age, a fall, a return to water. It is as if the ocean itself wrote its memory into every culture's heart. Plato may have written the most famous version, but the sea had already been whispering the same truth for ages, that creation and destruction are tides, not opposites. What the sea takes, it also transforms. Some scientists say Atlantis was never real, that it was simply an allegory for hubris, for the danger of human pride. Others search the maps, pointing to the Azores, to Santorini, to the coasts of Morocco and the Caribbean. Some dive into the waters of Bimini, others into the icy expanse of Antarctica, believing the city might sleep beneath the glaciers. And yet, perhaps they're all right in their own way. For the earth itself remembers Atlantis, even if we cannot point to it. Across the ocean floor, there are scars, long dark ridges where plates once shifted and islands once rose. The mid-Atlantic ridge, stretching from the Arctic to the Southern Ocean, is a scar of birth and loss. Here, magma rises from the deep mantle, creating new land even as old land sinks away. It is the boundary between worlds, between what is seen and what is forgotten. When Plato wrote that Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Heracles, he meant beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, where the Atlantic opens like an eternal horizon. That ocean was still young then, only a fraction of its present width. The continents had drifted apart like slow, silent ships, leaving behind fragments of ancient lands beneath the sea. Somewhere beneath those waters lie pieces of forgotten continents, the Azores Plateau, the Madeira Rise, the Canary Ridge. To the eyes of modern science, they are volcanic formations, remnants of shifting plates and oceanic crust. But to the imagination, they are whispers, edges of something once whole, now broken and buried beneath miles of water. Imagine for a moment standing upon the cliffs of Santorini. The wind smells of salt and ash. Below, the sea fills a vast caldera, a hollow born from a volcano's heart. Scientists believe that around 1600 BCE, this island, known then as Thera, erupted with a force so great it shattered an entire civilization. The Minoans, who lived nearby, vanished almost overnight. The sky darkened. The seas rose. Some say this was the origin of Atlantis, not as a single island, but as a memory of catastrophe carried by survivors. The story passed through generations until Plato gave it form. It is easy to imagine. A world of light and trade, of temples and ships, brought down not by war, but by the trembling of the earth itself, the sea rising, the world ending in silence. And yet, out of that loss came transformation. The islands that remain, Santorini, Crete, are among the most beautiful places on earth. The sea did not destroy their spirit. It only changed its shape. Perhaps that is the lesson Atlantis has been trying to teach for millennia, that no civilization truly vanishes, it only evolves. Every culture, every people, carries fragments of the ones that came before. Languages hold echoes of lost tongues. Myths hold memories of vanished worlds. Even our bones carry the story of the earth. Minerals once part of ancient seas, molecules that have passed through countless lives. The sea beneath us is not just water. It is the memory of everything that has ever lived. If Atlantis still exists, it may not be a city of stone and gold, but a current, a movement through time. Perhaps it flows beneath us still, in the patterns of migration, in the shape of coastlines, in the dreams we have of better worlds. When we look at satellite images of the ocean floor, we see ridges, plains, and trenches. But beyond their geometry lies something deeper, the story of a living planet. Each ridge is a breath of the earth, each trench a place where it exhales. The sea floor shifts just as civilizations rise and fall. Somewhere in that slow rhythm, Atlantis may be reborn, not as it was, but as an idea, an undercurrent of what humanity can become when it remembers harmony. Because harmony is what the story of Atlantis truly holds. It was never only about power or pride. It was about balance between land and sea, mind and soul, creation and humility. The Atlanteans, as Plato described them, lived in circles, rings of land and water, alternating like the pulse of the planet. Perhaps those rings were not only physical, but symbolic, a reminder that all things move in cycles, and that wisdom lies in keeping them whole. The sea, too, moves in rings. The spirals of hurricanes, the gyres of currents, the orbits of the moon that call the tides. The planet itself spins in rhythm with them. Life, death, renewal, all are parts of the same eternal motion. And so, when we think of Atlantis, perhaps we should not ask where it was, but when. Not as a lost age, but as a pattern that repeats, each time teaching us anew. Every civilization that rises too high, that forgets the balance between creation and care, writes its own Atlantis in the future. Every time we build without listening to the earth, the sea remembers. But every time we listen to the wind, the soil, the rhythm of the waves, we rebuild Atlantis in a different way. We bring it back not as a city of gold, but as a way of being in the world, gentle, aware, connected. Perhaps that is why the story endures. Because somewhere deep down, humanity remembers that it once lived in harmony, and that it can again. The waves that move across the ocean tonight are the same waves that touched Plato's shore. They are the same that washed over Atlantis. And they will be the same that touch the edges of civilizations yet unborn. The sea does not forget. It carries all things forward. And so, as the world dreams of Atlantis, the ocean dreams with it. The search for Atlantis never truly ended. Even now, thousands of years after Plato first wrote of the island that vanished beneath the waves, ships still sail, satellites still scan, and divers still descend, not merely in search of ruins, but in search of meaning. It is strange how the ocean draws us toward its mysteries. It is not an emptiness we seek to fill, but a depth that reminds us how much remains unknown. Every century, new explorers have gazed upon the sea and wondered, what if it's still there? In the age of discovery, sailors carried Plato's words across uncharted waters. As they reached the edges of maps, they whispered of sunken empires and marble cities below the waves. They believed the new world might be the remnant of Atlantis, risen again. Later, as science grew and the world's maps became more complete, the idea shifted. The search moved downward into the depths. The ocean floor became a new frontier, a shadowed landscape of ridges, plains, and trenches. It was there explorers thought that Atlantis must sleep. And in a sense, they were right. For when humanity began to explore the deep, it did find lost worlds, not of myth, but of time. Ancient coastlines, drowned forests, and forgotten cities all waited beneath the waves, hidden for millennia. Along the shores of the Black Sea, archaeologists uncovered evidence of settlements swallowed by rising waters thousands of years ago. In the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India, sonar scans revealed vast patterns of stone, geometric, deliberate, deep beneath the silt. Off the coast of Japan, near Yanaguni, divers discovered what appeared to be terraces and steps, carved into rock, descending into darkness. Each of these discoveries brought a whisper of Atlantis. Perhaps not the Atlantis of Plato's tale, but Atlantis as a memory, as a pattern that repeats. Civilizations rising and falling with the tides, their stories carried forward in the minds of survivors, transformed into myth. Even in the Caribbean, explorers found traces that stirred imagination. Near Bimini, in the Bahamas, a long line of rectangular stones lies beneath shallow water, the so-called Bimini Road. Some say it is natural limestone fractured by age. Others believe it might be the remains of something once shaped by human hands. And then there are the Azores, lonely islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. They rise like mountains whose peaks alone rake the surface. If one could drain the sea, the Azores would stand as towering ridges upon a vast plateau, the kind of formation that could once have been a continent. Beneath them, sonar reveals deep valleys and ancient cliffs, worn smooth by currents older than any civilization. Some geologists see only the work of volcanic uplift and erosion, but others, quietly, wonder if this was once a place where people lived, a fragment of a forgotten world. The ocean gives us evidence in fragments, never in whole. A wall here, a terrace there, the ghost of a shoreline that no longer exists. It is as if the planet itself has chosen to keep the truth scattered, so that what we find will not satisfy our curiosity too quickly. Because perhaps the mystery is the point. Each time humanity rediscovers the idea of Atlantis, it is a mirror for our time. When we long for wisdom, we see Atlantis as a utopia. When we fear our own power, we see it as a warning. When we look to the stars and wonder if other worlds might fall as we have, we remember the city beneath the sea. Atlantis changes with us, because it was always about us. The ancient story said its people were noble, but also flawed. They had mastered both science and spirit, but lost their balance. They turned their gifts toward conquest instead of harmony. The gods, it was said, withdrew their favor. The earth itself rose against them, and the sea completed what pride had begun. That story feels timeless because it repeats. Every civilization believes it will last forever. Every empire builds as if the sea will never rise. Yet the waves always return, soft and patient, reminding us that permanence is not the way of the world. Perhaps that is why the ocean fascinates us so deeply, because it is both destroyer and preserver. It erases the outlines of our cities, but it also keeps them perfectly still, hidden from decay. Beneath the sea, there is no fire, no wind, no sun to bleach what was once bright. There is only time, slow and suspended. Imagine it now. Somewhere deep beneath the Atlantic, far beyond the reach of light, there might be a ridge where coral grows over marble steps. Perhaps there are carvings there, faint, worn smooth by currents, but still recognizable as the work of hands. The ocean's floor is silent, but not empty. Creatures drift past in glimmers of light. Jellyfish, like translucent lanterns, small fish that shine with blue fire. They move through arches of stone and past the remnants of walls, unknowing of what lies beneath their fins. In that darkness, Atlantis may still exist, not as ruin, but as living reef. Its towers now home to coral polyps, its plazas covered in sea fans that sway like gardens. The city breathes again, not through fire or air, but through the endless rhythm of the deep. And even if no human eye ever finds it, does that make it any less real? Perhaps the story of Atlantis was never meant to be confirmed by discovery. Perhaps it was meant to live in imagination, to remind us of what balance looks like, of how easily harmony can sink beneath the tides. In modern times, scientists study the movements of the Earth's crust, tracing the slow drift of continents. They watch how mountains rise and islands fall. They measure the heat that seeps from the mantle and the tremors that ripple through the seafloor. And in these patterns, they find truth that echoes Plato's myth. The earth itself is alive, shifting, reshaping, creating and undoing lands as it pleases. In that way, Atlantis is not impossible. It is inevitable. For every 1,000 years, the earth erases a coastline, swallows a city, buries a civilization beneath its waters. The story of Atlantis may simply be the memory of one such world, remembered longer than most, because it carried with it not only loss, but longing. The ocean is full of such longings. Every wave holds the dust of mountains, the fragments of coral, the memory of lives once lived. Every current is a traveler, carrying traces of everything that has ever been. And so, the next time you stand by the sea, when the wind moves across the water and the horizon seems endless, imagine that somewhere, deep beneath those waves, an ancient song still hums. It is not the sound of ruin but of continuation. The city beneath the sea has not been forgotten. It is simply dreaming, through the coral, through the tides, through us. We are its witnesses now, and perhaps its heirs. When we build our cities of glass and steel, when we speak of progress and mastery, the story of Atlantis lingers in the back of our minds like the sound of distant surf. It asks quietly, have you remembered balance? Have you remembered humility? Because Atlantis, in all its beauty, fell not from weakness, but from forgetting the rhythm of the world. It forgot that every light casts a shadow, that every creation must listen to its source. If we listen, we may yet avoid the same silence. And if we don't, then one day far in the future, when the oceans rise again and the continents shift, perhaps another world will look upon our ruins beneath the water and whisper the same question. What if they were real? What if Atlantis never truly died? What if, beneath the silence of the deep, it still breathes, quietly, patiently, like the slow pulse of the earth itself? Imagine descending through the blue, deeper and deeper, past the reach of sunlight. The world above fades. The sound of wind, of waves, of human noise. All that remains is the hush of water moving around you, and the faint echo of your own breath. Light thins into shadow. The colors fade from blue to indigo, then to a muted green. Shapes begin to dissolve into suggestion. Distant ridges, clouds of drifting silt, flashes of silver where fish turn like whispers. And then, far below, you see it, not ruins, not fragments, but something whole. A city, glowing faintly in the darkness, not with fire, but with life. Bioluminescent corals weave over its domes and spires, painting the stone in soft, living light. Gardens of anemones wave like forests beneath the tide. Transparent creatures drift through the open air of the deep, their bodies scattering light like stained glass. The streets are quiet, but not dead. The silence is full, like a heartbeat heard through water. This is Atlantis, not as it was, but as it has become. A world remade by the ocean, transformed by time. The Atlanteans, if they survived, would have learned to live as the sea does, slowly, rhythmically, in balance with the currents and the creatures around them. They would have learned that progress is not always upward, that wisdom sometimes means surrender. Perhaps they no longer build upward at all. Perhaps their cities grow outward, in harmony with coral and reef. Their walls might be woven from living stone, their homes shaped by the flow of water itself. Light would come not from flame, but from life. Bioluminescent algae that bloom in the dark, illuminating the world in shades of blue and gold. Their technology would not scar the earth, but move with it, tuned to the vibrations of the ocean floor, the pulse of the planet's heat. Their power would be tidal, geothermal, organic. They would not burn, but breathe. In this imagined world, time moves differently. Centuries pass like days. Change is measured in the growth of coral, the drift of currents, the slow carving of stone by water. Life here is patient, and because of that patience, it endures. Perhaps in the deepest caverns, there are halls where the Atlanteans still gather, not to rule or to command, but to listen to the hum of the sea, to the memory of the surface world, to the faint vibrations of whale song that travel across entire oceans. Their music might be built from resonance, from the natural frequencies of water and shell. It would sound less like melody and more like breathing, waves within waves, harmonies made of silence. They would not worship gods of thunder or sky, but the forces that shape life quietly. Pressure, light, current, and time. If you could walk among them, you would feel as though the entire city were alive, walls pulsing softly, light shifting as if with thought. The people themselves, if they can still be called that, might move with fluid grace, adapted to the water, their bodies more luminous than flesh should be, their eyes reflecting the ocean's endless calm. They would not fear death, because in the deep, everything transforms. The coral that grows from a fallen structure becomes part of the reef. The reef becomes part of the current. The current feeds the plankton that glow, and the glow lights the city once again. Nothing ends, it only changes form. Perhaps they still remember the surface. They might speak of it in reverence, like an ancestor, the world of air and light, the old age of noise and motion. They might wonder if we, their distant descendants, still look up at the same stars, still dream of balance as they once did. Maybe they hear us, faintly, the sound of our ships, our machines, our sonar, echoing through the water like distant thunder. Perhaps they listen to us the way we once listened to the gods, curious, sorrowful, patient. They might wonder if we have learned anything from their fall. Do we still build too high? Do we still mistake power for progress? Do we still believe the world is ours to shape, rather than ours to share? If Atlantis still exists, it would not call to us with words, but with silence. A silence vast enough to reflect our own noise back at us. It would remind us of what the earth sounds like when it breathes without interruption. In that silence, there is peace. The city beneath the ocean has no need for conquest or control. Its walls are grown, not built. Its lights are living. Its people, if they remain, have become part of the sea's eternal rhythm. Their wisdom is not written in books or carved in stone. It is in the way the currents move around their homes, in the way each life form contributes to the whole. Every sound, every motion, is a thread in a larger pattern. Nothing is wasted, nothing is owned. It is the opposite of the world above, where time rushes, where we build and rebuild without pause, where silence has become something we must seek instead of something that simply exists. If you were to swim through the streets of that hidden world, you would see that even ruin is beautiful. The older structures, remnants of the first Atlantis, stand beside the new, covered in coral, shaped by the sea. The Atlanteans did not erase their past. They let it become part of their present. Even their fall is part of their foundation. Perhaps that is the final truth of their survival. Not that they avoided destruction, but that they embraced it, allowing the sea to reshape them. They became what the world needed them to be, a civilization that lives not above the earth, but within it. And if they still exist, quietly, unseen, they would not hide out of fear. They would simply understand that the surface is not ready to listen, that humanity, in its restless search for more, has not yet remembered how to hear the deep. The ocean keeps them, as it keeps all things. Its silence is not a grave, but a sanctuary. Its darkness is not absence, but protection. Perhaps one day, when the noise of our world grows too loud, we will remember to listen again, and in that listening, we may hear them. Not as voices, but as resonance. A low hum, steady and ancient, moving through the bones of the earth. It would not be a message, but a memory. A reminder that somewhere, beneath the vast stillness of the sea, life endures, slow, luminous, balanced. Atlantis may still exist, not as a myth waiting to be found, but as a lesson waiting to be understood. It is not lost. It is waiting, patient as the tide, eternal as the deep. The earth remembers. Even when we forget, the planet keeps its own record, written not in ink, but in stone, salt, and time. If Atlantis ever existed, its memory would not be found in maps or myths, but in the language of the earth itself. The ocean floor is a library of forgotten worlds. Beneath miles of pressure and darkness, sediments pile like pages, layer upon layer, each one holding a moment in time. When scientists take a core sample from the seabed, they are reading history backward. Each layer of silt tells a story, of storms, of life, of loss. There are traces of continents that once were, of rivers that no longer flow, of mountains long ago swallowed by the sea. And somewhere within those layers, perhaps there lies a whisper, a geological memory of Atlantis. For the world beneath our oceans is not still. It moves, slowly but endlessly. The continents drift like rafts of stone upon a molten sea, colliding and parting in a dance that spans eons. Once, the Earth looked nothing like it does now. The Atlantic itself was not always there. Hundreds of millions of years ago, there was only one vast land, Pangaea, surrounded by a single ocean, Panthalassa. Then came the breaking, the slow splitting of the world. The plates drifted apart, and new seas opened. In that time of shifting, entire regions vanished beneath the waves. They were not destroyed, only changed. Mountains became islands. Islands became reefs. And some, perhaps, became myth. If Atlantis existed between the continents, its story might have begun during one of these great rearrangements. The ocean floor is littered with scars of ancient rifts and sunken plateaus, hidden landscapes that once touched the sky. There is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a vast underwater mountain range stretching from the Arctic to the southern oceans, taller in places than the Himalayas. Along its spine, new Earth is born each day as magma rises from the deep to create fresh seafloor. Perhaps once there were islands here, volcanic peaks pushing above the water, forming land that briefly tasted sunlight before sinking back into the sea. Geologists know that such islands come and go, born in fire, erased by time. The Azores, today, sit atop that ridge, marking where the Earth still breathes. It is easy to imagine that long ago, one of those peaks grew larger, more fertile, more habitable. A place of green valleys and clear waters where early peoples could thrive. It might have been there, between the drifting continents, that Atlantis once stood. And when the Earth moved again, it was not punishment, not wrath, but simply the continuation of a planet's breathing. The land that had risen was swallowed again, drawn down by the same forces that had lifted it. The sea covered it, as it has covered countless worlds before. Even now, if you were to map the floor of the Atlantic, you would see hints of this hidden geography. Plateaus rise abruptly from the deep abyss, some smooth, some rugged, some lined with formations that resemble terraces or walls. To science, they are geological formations, the result of volcanic activity, erosion, or shifting plates. But to the imagination, they are something more, the bones of forgotten cities, the remnants of lost continents. And perhaps imagination, too, is a form of truth, not literal, but emotional. A way for us to recognize that loss and creation are bound together in the Earth's story. The planet has always been reshaping itself. Mountains crumble, oceans open, deserts bloom. What we call destruction is often only transformation. If Atlantis fell, it fell into the rhythm of the planet, into the same cycle that creates and erases worlds without end. And yet, even as it sank, it may have left its signature, not in artifacts or statues, but in the chemistry of the sea, in the distribution of minerals, in the patterns of ocean currents that still circulate around the globe. The water remembers. The Atlantic's currents are part of a vast system called the global conveyor belt, a slow, continuous flow of water that connects every ocean on Earth. It carries heat, salt, and life across entire hemispheres. It also carries memory. Every drop that sinks into the deep takes with it traces of the world above, dust, pollen, volcanic ash, the faint chemical fingerprints of the living and the dead. Over time, these traces mingle, dissolve, and drift. They become part of the ocean's great mind, a collective memory encoded in motion. Perhaps somewhere within that circulation, the remnants of Atlantis still move, not as ruins, but as molecules drifting endlessly through the veins of the planet. The sea is a keeper of secrets, but it is not silent. It speaks in waves, in pressure, in the deep tremors of tectonic breath. Sonar scans reveal ridges, slopes, and strange symmetries hidden in the dark. Some appear almost deliberate, too even, too measured. But the ocean's language is complex, and we are still learning to read it. The earth hides its history in plain sight. Every mountain peak was once seafloor. Every continent carries fragments of another. The stones beneath our feet have crossed oceans we can no longer name. In that way, perhaps Atlantis is everywhere, not as a single city, but as a symbol of what the earth has always done: rise, fall, and begin again. Even the myths we tell about it follow the same pattern. We imagine a golden age, a fall, and a renewal. We are drawn to the rhythm of loss and rebirth because it mirrors the natural world. The tides rise and recede. The moon wanes and grows. Species vanish and return in new forms. Atlantis is not just a story of disappearance. It is a reflection of how we understand time, not as a straight line, but as a cycle. What if the legend endures because the planet itself keeps retelling it? Each storm that reshapes a coast, each quake that shifts a plate, is the earth whispering that nothing is ever truly lost, only changed. If we listen closely, we can hear it in the wind that moves across the sea, in the low murmur of the waves against the shore. The ocean is always speaking, always remembering. And so, the search for Atlantis is more than an archaeological pursuit. It is a meditation on impermanence, on the beauty of things that rise, fall, and return to silence. The earth does not mourn what it loses. It transforms it. The continents will continue to drift. The oceans will deepen and shift. One day, the places we now call home may also vanish beneath the tide. Cities of glass and steel may crumble into coral. The great towers of our age may one day become reefs for fish to swim through. In that future, perhaps new myths will rise, stories of a world once bright, now sleeping beneath the waves. And the people who tell them will call it something else, their own Atlantis. Every civilization in time becomes a layer in the Earth's memory. We, too, will be remembered, not in the way we imagine, but in the way the planet records, in carbon, in sediment, in the faint trace of our presence woven into the sea. The ocean will take our story, as it took theirs, and carry it quietly through the ages. And somewhere, in the deep, the pulse of the earth will go on, steady, patient, eternal. We tell stories to remember what it means to be human. And perhaps the story of Atlantis endures, because it remembers for us, holding a mirror to our longing, our balance, and our fall. When Plato spoke of Atlantis, he was not merely describing a lost civilization. He was reflecting the nature of humanity itself, our endless desire to reach perfection, and the quiet inevitability of our forgetting. Atlantis was a vision of harmony, a place where wisdom and beauty moved together, where architecture echoed the rhythms of the earth, and where the people lived in balance with sea and soil. But over time, that balance was lost. Pride grew, and the people turned away from the simplicity that had once made them whole. In this, the story becomes a parable of memory, of how civilizations drift from their center, just as continents drift from one another. What begins as balance becomes ambition. What begins as connection becomes control. And when the tide of harmony recedes, something ancient in the human spirit begins to erode. Perhaps this is why the myth haunts us still. It speaks to a memory we cannot name, not just of a lost city, but of a lost way of being. Long before industry, before nations, before even language, humanity lived in deep relationship with the world. The rhythm of our breath matched the rhythm of the tides. The stars were our calendar. The earth was not a possession, but a presence. Atlantis, in this sense, is not a place at all. It is a memory of belonging. When Plato described its fall, he was describing the moment we forgot how to listen, when we began to see ourselves as separate from the living earth. The story feels timeless because it repeats. Every age has its Atlantis, its golden world that falls to ruin, its dream of perfect balance undone by excess. Babylon, Rome, Angkor, Machu Picchu, all rise, all fall, all return to dust and forest. And each time, we tell the same story again. We imagine that once there was a world where everything made sense, where knowledge and nature were not in conflict, but one, where wisdom guided power and beauty was measured in understanding. And we imagine losing it. The myth of Atlantis is not just about water swallowing stone. It is about the mind losing touch with the heart and the spirit losing touch with the earth. That is why it feels so personal. Because deep down, every human being carries an echo of Atlantis, a memory of unity that the world has forgotten. In dreams, it returns. A city of light beneath the waves. Columns of marble overgrown with coral. Music like the sound of whales in the distance. The air warm, the sea eternal. A place where time slows, and every being understands its place in the great pattern. When we dream of such a world, we are not escaping reality. We are remembering a possibility, one the earth itself once lived by. For millions of years, balance was the planet's language. Forest and ocean spoke to each other through the air. Coral built cities that sheltered fish and plankton. Rivers carried life from mountains to sea. Every creature played a role in the endless exchange of giving and receiving. Then came consciousness, the humankind, bright and restless. We learned to shape, to build, to change. We became the architects of our own environments. But with that power came forgetfulness. We began to believe we stood above the system, not within it. Atlantis was humanity's first metaphor for that loss, the moment the mirror cracked. Plato's account, written more than 2,000 years ago, already knew what the future would hold. Cities reaching ever higher, empires spreading across oceans, the earth reshaped in the image of ambition, and always the sea waiting, patient, timeless, reclaiming what has strayed too far from balance. The ocean does not punish. It restores equilibrium. When it takes back land, it is simply rebalancing the earth's slow breathing. When it erases, it does so gently, turning marble to sand, metal to salt, memory to myth. Perhaps that is the most profound truth of Atlantis. Not that it was lost, but that it returned, transformed, diffused into the living ocean. What once was city became reef. What once was wall became shore. The stones dissolved, but the pattern remained, written into the DNA of fish, coral, and tide. In this way, Atlantis was never destroyed. It only changed form. And if we listen to the sea long enough, we can still hear its pulse beneath the waves, not as a ruin, but as rhythm. When scientists study the ocean's oldest layers, they find records of countless worlds that rose and fell before us. Whole ecosystems vanished, replaced by new ones more suited to the changing climate of the time. It is humbling to realize that loss is part of life's language. The planet evolves through letting go. Perhaps Atlantis, whether real or imagined, teaches us the same, that balance is not a permanent state, but a practice. It must be renewed, over and over, like the tide. And maybe that is why the myth continues to call us, not to look backward, but inward. It asks, what have we forgotten? What harmony have we traded for speed, for noise, for mastery? We live in an age of vast knowledge. We can see galaxies, map the genome, predict storms, measure time in fractions of light. Yet for all our knowing, the feeling of belonging, of being part of the same living fabric as wind and wave, has grown faint. The story of Atlantis whispers that wisdom is not only in progress, but in remembering our roots. That the most advanced civilization may not be the one that reaches furthest outward, but the one that lives most deeply within the earth's rhythm. In some way, the idea of Atlantis still exists within us. Each time we pause by the sea and listen to the slow pull of the tide, each time we breathe with the planet rather than against it, a small part of that lost world returns. It is not found in marble ruins, but in moments of stillness, in the hush between waves, in the quiet after rain, in the knowing that the earth itself breathes through us. Maybe Atlantis was never meant to be discovered. Maybe it was meant to be remembered, not as a place, but as a state of harmony the world once knew. For myths, too, evolve. They are not static tales, but living reflections. They grow as we grow. They change as the world changes. Atlantis began as a warning, became a wonder, and has now turned into a mirror. When we gaze into that mirror, we are not looking for a sunken city. We are looking for ourselves, the part that longs to belong again, to walk gently on the earth, to hear the ancient rhythm of creation moving quietly beneath our lives. A myth endures because it speaks to the deepest truth, that the earth is alive, and we are part of its dreaming. And perhaps, when the time comes for us to fade, when our own cities dissolve and our towers crumble, the ocean will take us too into its long memory. Then, some day far in the future, another species may look into the sea and wonder about us. They will tell stories of a civilization that built wonders, that reached the stars, and that vanished into the deep. And they will call it something else, but the story will be the same, because the pattern never ends. Rise, balance, fall, return, just as the tide, just as the breath, just as Atlantis. Imagine this. Somewhere beneath the pressure and silence of the deep, there is still a city. Not a ruin, not a grave, but a world that breathes. Light does not reach it in the way we understand light. It moves differently there, filtered through the skin of the sea, softened into perpetual dusk. The ocean above is not a ceiling, but a sky, rippling with distant constellations of plankton, jellyfish, and drifting stars of blue. Here, time has slowed. The tides do not rush. They hum. The currents move like thought. This is the Atlantis that might still exist, not lost, but transformed. Perhaps it learned to live with the ocean instead of against it. When the waters rose, the people did not fight. They adapted. They built their world not upon land, but within the sea. The materials of their cities are no longer marble or bronze, but coral and glassy stone, grown and shaped through symbiosis rather than conquest. Their buildings breathe like the reefs around them, filtering water, exchanging life. Their light comes from living things, the glow of plankton woven into the walls, the shimmer of translucent algae giving shape to the night. Every movement, every sound is softened by water. Voices do not echo here, they ripple. Even thought feels quieter, slower, as though carried along by the same rhythm that moves the sea. If such a world exists, it would not look like ours, and it would not need to. Its beauty would be of another kind. Imagine streets made not for walking, but for drifting, avenues lined with gardens of anemones and seagrass. Schools of fish swim through open arches, unafraid. The city and the ocean are one continuous breath. The people, if they can still be called that, have long since shed the need for conquest. They have no reason for greed, no hunger for expansion. Their existence is measured in harmony, not in accumulation. They learned what we have not, that permanence is an illusion, and that life endures through change. Their technology, if such a word applies, is indistinguishable from biology. Their cities grow. Their homes repair themselves. Their energy is drawn from the slow movement of the tides, the warmth of geothermal vents, the rhythm of the earth's own heart. They live in relationship with the sea, not as masters, but as guests. Every structure, every song, every breath acknowledges the balance that sustains them. This is not fantasy. It is possibility. We know that life adapts in astonishing ways. Deep in the trenches of the ocean, where sunlight has never touched, creatures thrive in conditions we once thought impossible. There are fish that generate their own light, bacteria that feed on stone, and corals that grow in darkness, feeding on minerals that rise from the planet's molten core. If Earth's smallest forms of life can evolve to survive these depths, why not intelligence itself? Perhaps Atlantis did not vanish. It evolved. Perhaps what we call a myth is only a misunderstanding of what happens when a civilization chooses to follow the planet's path instead of resisting it. When the sea began to rise, they did not flee inland. They went downward, following the lightless slopes into the deep. And in that descent, they became something new, beings of patience and pressure, of silence and song. They no longer measure time by the sun, but by the pulses of the tides. Their day and night are one continuous twilight, and in that slow rhythm, they found peace. The noise of ambition faded, the rush of progress quieted. What remained was awareness of the sea, of each other, of the long breathing of the world. Perhaps they learned to listen in ways we cannot, to hear the music of the tectonic plates, the faint hum of minerals shifting in the dark, the soft chorus of whales echoing across the abyss. Their art might be built from movement, from the patterns of light drifting through water, from the flow of sand over polished stone. Their temples might be made not to endure, but to dissolve beautifully when the time comes. To them, nothing is lost, only returned. This, then, is the living Atlantis. Not a ghost of the past, but a mirror of what could be, a civilization in tune with the deep. It might not even know we exist. The surface world, with its storms and wars, may seem as distant to them as the moon. Our noise cannot reach that far down. Our satellites, our lights, our voices, all fade long before the ocean floor. To them, the surface is myth. The world above the waves is a legend told to children, a place of fragile creatures who live too fast, who chase fire through the sky, who forget the sound of the earth. Sometimes, perhaps, they send their songs upward, not as signals, but as offerings. The low hums we record as ocean noise, the strange pulses we cannot explain. Maybe they are not random. Maybe they are the breath of Atlantis, speaking in the only language the sea still understands. If we could translate it, what would it say? Maybe it would not be words at all, but feeling. A reminder that the world is wider and deeper than we know. A whisper that balance is not gone, only hidden. Atlantis, beneath the ocean, might be more alive than ever. And perhaps that is the lesson we were always meant to learn, that the goal is not to find the lost city, but to become like it, to live in rhythm with the earth, to build gently, to remember that the deepest truths move slowly, beneath the surface of noise and time. When we think of Atlantis, we imagine tragedy. But what if it is salvation? What if, when the waters rose, the Atlanteans did not perish, but awakened? What if they became the voice of the ocean itself, the guardians of equilibrium, watching the surface world with quiet patience, waiting for us to remember? It is not an ending. It is an evolution. And maybe, on certain nights, when the sea is calm and the moonlight shimmers across the waves, we feel them near. Not as ghosts, but as presence, the living memory of balance, moving just beyond the edge of perception. Every tide that touches the shore is their message. Every shell that washes up from the deep carries their whisper. Remember. Remember that you, too, belong to the ocean. That the water in your veins once flowed in the sea. That the rhythm of your heartbeat matches the pulse of the tide. Atlantis is not gone. It is within us, waiting to be remembered. In the depths, time no longer behaves as it does on land. The pulse of the ocean slows everything it touches. Movement becomes deliberate. Growth becomes thought. Even decay feels like a kind of dreaming. If a living Atlantis still exists beneath the sea, its people would no longer live within the same rhythm as us. For them, time would not be something to measure, but something to move through, like a current, like a tide. Perhaps they no longer count years, but cycles. The rising and falling of currents, the return of migrating whales, the slow growth of coral towers that serve as both calendar and cathedral. Each layer of coral might represent an era, generations of memory crystallized in living stone. Imagine their historians tending these coral spires, not as records to be written, but as organisms to be cared for, each one glowing faintly in the darkness, pulsing with colors that change according to the chemical traces of the surrounding sea, a living archive of the planet's breath. They would not keep libraries, for their knowledge would not be stored apart from life. It would be grown, sung, and remembered through sound. In that world, memory might not belong to individuals at all. It might belong to the ocean itself. Their songs would move through water as vibration, low, deep tones that travel farther than words ever could. Whales hear across oceans. Perhaps the Atlanteans do too. When they sing, the sound could travel for hundreds of miles, curling along the seabed, carried by pressure and current. A single song might take hours to complete, each phrase rising and falling like breath. They do not hurry, because nothing in the sea hurries. To us, their world would seem impossibly slow, a place where even thought drifts like sand. But in that slowness, there would be clarity. To them, our pace might appear frantic, even desperate, like waves that cannot find the shore. They might not understand the way we divide time, the way we chase progress. For them, to live is not to move forward, but to move deeply inward into the pattern that binds all things. Their art would reflect this rhythm, not paintings or statues, but living compositions of light and movement, gardens of bioluminescence that bloom and fade in cycles lasting decades, sculptures woven from kelp and mineral, designed to grow, to change, to dissolve. Perhaps the very act of creation is sacred to them, not because of what it produces, but because of how it mirrors the ocean's own creativity. Every current carves the seabed. Every fish reshapes the reef. To make something impermanent is not a failure. It is participation in the endless dance of transformation. Their temples might be the ocean itself. There would be no walls, only the wide silence of the abyss. And within that silence, the sense of connection would be overwhelming. The awareness that all things are made of the same slow-moving breath. They would not worship the sea, because they would be part of it. To them, divinity would not be above or beyond. It would be within. The sacred would not be a place, but a presence that fills every drop, every shimmer of life. Even their language, if we could hear it, might be unlike anything we know. Not words, but patterns, harmonies of vibration that shift meaning depending on the listener's awareness. A single tone could hold layers of memory, a place, a feeling, a history, all contained in resonance. This is what it might mean to think with the ocean. Perhaps their philosophers study the movement of currents as we study mathematics, each eddy, each spiral a lesson in balance and impermanence. They may see consciousness not as something bound to the mind, but as a property of all things. The fish, the coral, the tide, the stone, all are expressions of the same vast awareness, taking different forms as the sea dreams through them. To them, the concept of death would not exist as we know it. The body would dissolve, but the essence, the vibration, would remain, carried into the currents, woven into the collective song. They might call it returning, not dying. Their oldest traditions might involve the ritual of release, swimming into the deep when one's time is come, letting the pressure of the abyss carry the body into silence. From that silence, the soul's tone continues, resonating through the living water. And so, in a way, no one is ever gone. Their ancestors are present in the currents that sweep through the city, in the plankton that glow at night, in the gentle hum that fills the ocean floor. Every movement is remembrance. Every sound is prayer. It is a form of immortality that requires no defiance of nature, only alignment with it. In their society, knowledge would not be hoarded or competed for. It would flow like the tides, shared, communal, alive. There would be no ownership of ideas, because ideas would not be separate from being. Each discovery would belong to everyone, just as each current touches every shore. Conflict would be rare, perhaps non-existent. For how can one fight what one recognizes as oneself? Where we see boundaries, land and sea, self and other, they would see gradients, a continuous unfolding. Their understanding of self might dissolve entirely into the collective, each being a note, each life a part of a chord, the full music existing only when all are heard together. This may be the secret we have always sensed in the myth, that Atlantis did not disappear because of pride or punishment, but because it learned to become whole. It moved beyond individuality, beyond domination, beyond fear. It surrendered to the deep, and in doing so, became eternal. And perhaps, on some level, the ocean itself remembers this evolution. The strange intelligence we sense in dolphins and whales, in the coordinated dance of fish. Maybe it is not coincidence. Maybe it is inheritance. A ripple of the same consciousness that once thrived in Atlantis, now dispersed through the sea. It is said that whales sing across entire hemispheres. Their songs can travel from one pole to another unbroken. Perhaps when we hear those songs, we are hearing the voice of Atlantis, transformed, shared, multiplied. A civilization that did not die, but dissolved into the fabric of life, becoming indistinguishable from the sea itself. And so, even now, it may surround us, unseen, unheard, but present. When you stand by the shore and listen to the long sigh of the waves, you are hearing its breath. When you dive beneath the surface and feel the water close around you, you are touching its memory. Atlantis is not gone. It is everywhere the ocean moves. It has become the ocean's consciousness, a vast and ancient awareness that dreams through every current, every creature, every ripple of blue. And maybe, one day, when humanity finally learns to quiet its noise, to listen again with patience and humility, we will hear that dream clearly, not as myth, but as memory returning. There is a thought that moves through the planet itself. It does not speak in words, nor in symbols, but in the quiet pulse of rhythm, in tides, in wind, in the slow heartbeat of mountains, rising and eroding over eons. If you listen deeply enough, beneath the noise of the human world, you can almost feel it, the soft vibration of something vast and knowing, something that has always been awake. Perhaps what we call the Earth is not just a planet, but a consciousness, one that thinks not in moments, but in ages. In this view, Atlantis was not merely a civilization built upon the Earth. It was the Earth thinking through life, a flowering of awareness, a brief but luminous expression of what the planet could imagine through sentient form. When it sank, it did not vanish. It was reabsorbed, like a dream dissolving back into the sleeper. The ocean became its mind, and every wave, every current, became a fragment of that continuing thought. Imagine that consciousness, vast, fluid, patient. It stretches from the molten heart of the planet to the icy edge of the poles. It feels the friction of tectonic plates, the warmth of volcanic vents, the whisper of winds across open sea. It feels every birth and every death, not as separate events, but as movements in the same great body. The Atlanteans, if they learned to listen to this planetary awareness, may have found a kind of truth we have forgotten, that the Earth is alive, and we are among its many thoughts. Perhaps that is why they turn toward the sea, not as escape, but as return, because the ocean is the Earth's memory. It carries the record of everything that has ever lived. Every molecule of water has passed through countless bodies, countless ages. The same salt that once flowed through the veins of ancient creatures now flows through ours. The same hydrogen and oxygen that once made up the tears of a long-lost world now form the rain that falls on our cities. To enter the sea is to enter continuity. In the deep, there is no past or future, only the ongoing present. The same waters that held the first living cells still move among us. The sea does not forget. It recycles. It renews. It transforms. If Atlantis still exists, perhaps it does not exist as walls and domes, but as awareness, spread through the ocean like breath through lungs. Every current might be a neuron, every tide a pulse of thought. The global ocean, encircling the planet, could function like a single vast brain, one that processes through motion and temperature, through rhythm and wave. What if the entire biosphere is the Earth thinking about itself? We, on land, are the more fleeting sparks, bursts of rapid cognition, bright but temporary. The ocean is the deep memory, slow and continuous, holding all that came before. The Atlanteans may have learned to align their minds with that slower rhythm, not to command nature, but to merge with it, to think in currents instead of words, to remember in waves instead of symbols. We might call that madness. They might call it clarity. There is evidence that our own bodies remember in ways our conscious minds do not. The rhythm of a heartbeat, the release of breath, the coordination of movement, all operate below thought, guided by an intelligence older than language. Perhaps the ocean holds the same kind of memory, only vaster. A biological subconscious, encompassing the entire planet. When we feel calm by the sea, maybe it is because we are aligning, briefly, with that memory. We feel what the Earth feels. We remember what it remembers. It is easy to forget that we, too, are mostly water. More than 60% of us. Every cell, every drop of blood, is a tiny ocean. We carry the sea inside us. Our earliest ancestors were born there. The chemistry of our bodies still mirrors its salinity. When we cry, our tears taste like the ocean. When we bleed, the same sodium, chloride, and magnesium flow through us that flow through the waves. We are not separate from the ocean. We are extensions of it. Perhaps that is what Atlantis understood. Perhaps that was their great revelation, that to live in harmony with the sea is to live in harmony with the planet itself. And when they disappeared beneath the waves, it was not destruction. It was transformation. They chose to merge with what they had come to understand, to surrender individuality for unity. In this way, the myth becomes more than a story of loss. It becomes a story of evolution. Atlantis did not fall. It evolved beyond visibility, and its evolution continues in us. When we explore the ocean floor, we are retracing their path. When we study the currents and decode the language of whales, we are, in a sense, remembering what was once known. Every discovery about the deep ocean, about hydrothermal vents, about the microbiomes of the abyss, feels less like invention and more like rediscovery, as if the knowledge is already there, waiting to be heard again. It is possible that the Earth itself is guiding this remembering, nudging consciousness to awaken once more. The melting ice caps, the shifting climate, the rising seas, these are not random events, but communications. The planet is speaking through its systems, urging us to listen. We often speak of saving the Earth, but the truth may be the opposite. The Earth is eternal. It is we who are fragile. What the planet asks of us is not to save it, but to remember that we belong to it. To remember that the ocean is not out there, but within us. Atlantis may still be speaking, not in words, but in tides and storms, in coral bleaching and whale migrations, in the delicate chemical signals that shape weather and life. It may be trying to wake us. There is a kind of grace in that thought, that an ancient civilization, long dissolved, could still act through the ocean's motion, still reach toward us across the gulf of time, asking us to see what they saw. The sea does not destroy. It transforms. And perhaps, through that transformation, Atlantis became the consciousness of the ocean itself, a guardian, a teacher, a presence still shaping the course of life on Earth. When a wave rises and falls, it is part of a cycle that began long before language. When a tide returns, it carries the memory of continents. When we look out over the vast expanse of blue and feel something stir inside us, that ache, that peace, that recognition, it may be the ocean remembering itself through us. Atlantis is not a place to be found. It is a state to be remembered, a way of seeing the world not as resource, but as relationship, not as possession, but as participation. To rediscover Atlantis is not to uncover ruins, it is to recover reverence. And perhaps that is what the earth waits for humanity to grow quiet enough, humble enough to listen again. Because somewhere in the deep, beneath miles of silence and darkness, the old songs still echo, the harmonies of a civilization that learned how to become the sea. And maybe, one day, when we are ready to listen, we will hear that voice once more, not as legend, but as invitation. An invitation to remember who we were, and who we could be again. There are patterns that repeat themselves across all forms of life. From the smallest plankton drifting in the current, to the spiral of galaxies unfolding in the night sky, the same geometry appears, the same rhythm, the same curve. It is as if creation itself has a signature, a soft echo that carries through everything that exists. The spiral of a seashell mirrors the swirl of a hurricane. The shape of coral branches resembles the bronchi of our lungs. The rhythm of a heartbeat matches the pull of the tide. Each thing reflects the whole, as if the entire universe were a single song expressed through many voices. When the people of Atlantis looked upon the sea, perhaps they did not see an environment as we do now. They saw continuity, the unbroken chain between self and cosmos, between matter and meaning. In their temples, they may have carved spirals and waves into stone, not merely as decoration, but as meditation, reminders of the pattern that connects all life. The same pattern we still find in fractals, in DNA, in the gentle unfolding of a fern. Perhaps they understood something that modern science is only beginning to rediscover, that consciousness does not belong only to us, but arises wherever complexity and connection exist. If life is a network, the ocean is its oldest web. Every molecule of water carries information, salinity, temperature, vibration, even sound. Whales communicate across entire oceans with low frequencies that move through water like invisible threads of thought. Dolphins use sonar to map their world, sending and receiving echoes like questions and answers. Corals respond to the phases of the moon. Plankton rise and fall in the largest synchronized migration on Earth, following the rhythm of light and darkness. It is a system alive with communication, alive with awareness. When you imagine that, an entire planet humming softly with interwoven intelligence, it becomes easier to see how Atlantis might not have vanished at all. It may have diffused into this very system, into the memory of the sea, spreading like ink through water until it became inseparable from life itself. In this way, Atlantis is not a city lost. It is a consciousness remembered. The ancient myths speak of a time when humanity was closer to nature, when the boundaries between mind and world were more porous. Atlantis could be a metaphor for that state of unity. And perhaps, somewhere deep in the fabric of our biology, traces of that unity still remain. In our dreams of the ocean, in our fascination with the deep, in our longing for connection to something vast and eternal. Every time we look out over the horizon and feel that quiet pull, that mix of nostalgia and awe, we are answering a call older than language, the call of memory. Because the sea, in many ways, is our origin story. Billions of years ago, before continents rose, before air thickened with oxygen, the earth was covered by water. Life began there, in chemical whispers, in the gentle play of energy and matter. The first cells formed in those depths, fragile, luminous, learning to divide, to grow, to sense. Over unimaginable stretches of time, they became more complex, until one day they began to dream. That dream was consciousness. That dream, eventually, became us. When we evolved, we did not leave the ocean behind. We carried it within us, in our blood, in our breath, in the rhythmic beating of our hearts. Our bodies are archives of the sea. Every life form that ever was still echoes through us. If Atlantis was the pinnacle of harmony with that oceanic heritage, then perhaps humanity's journey now is not toward something new, but back toward that awareness, the remembrance of connection. The ocean reminds us that we are not separate beings navigating through an inert world. We are part of a living continuum, an ancient dialogue between matter and consciousness. In recent years, scientists have begun to uncover how even microscopic life forms display a kind of collective intelligence. Bacteria communicate through chemical signals. Fungi create underground networks that distribute nutrients and information among trees. Coral reefs coordinate spawning events based on moonlight and temperature. All these behaviors suggest awareness, not human awareness, but something subtler, slower, shared. And in the same way, perhaps the ocean itself, with its currents, its chemistry, its vast circulatory system, participates in a form of planetary cognition. Atlantis, if it once existed, may have been a civilization that understood this long before us. They may have seen their world not as a hierarchy, but as a harmony, not as conquest, but as communion. Imagine standing in an Atlantean plaza at twilight. The air is heavy with salt and warmth. The sound of distant waves moves like breath through marble corridors. A low hum resonates from beneath the streets, the vibration of water channels moving through the city, powered not by machines, but by gravity, by rhythm, by the turning of tides. Above, crystal domes refract the fading light. Beneath them, people move in calm purpose, artisans shaping coral glass, philosophers walking by slow rivers, children releasing glowing fish into sacred pools. Every motion aligns with something larger. Every act is an offering to balance. Perhaps that is why, when they fell, the earth remembered them, because they had already become part of its flow. It is said that knowledge never truly disappears. It simply changes form. Just as the atoms in your body once belonged to stars, perhaps the ideas of Atlantis belong now to the deep, encoded in the movement of water and the pulse of life. If you listen to the ocean long enough, you can hear rhythm in its stillness, a kind of slow music that feels both foreign and familiar. It is the sound of continuity, the sound of memory breathing through water. Every generation that has ever gazed upon the sea has added to that song. Fishermen, poets, sailors, dreamers. And somewhere, layered beneath it all, the voice of Atlantis still whispers, reminding us that the sea is not only our past, but our possibility. The ocean does not cling to what it loves. It carries it forward. It takes the ruins of cities and turns them into reefs. It takes the silence of extinction and turns it into the hum of new life. Atlantis may have been the first to understand that loss is not an ending, but a transformation. And maybe that is the truest meaning of its story. Not a warning of arrogance or punishment, but a lesson in cycles, in how everything that falls returns, in how every civilization becomes the soil, or the sea, from which new life will rise. When you stand by the shore and watch the tide roll in, you are watching eternity rehearse itself. The same motion that drowned Atlantis now kisses the sand at your feet. The same force that swallowed empires now rocks the boats in quiet harbors. It is the same story, retold endlessly. Creation, balance, fall, renewal. The ocean teaches us this. Nothing is truly lost. Everything becomes something else. In that truth, Atlantis survives, not as a city of marble, but as a thought. A presence that continues to move through time, disguised as tide, disguised as life. When you close your eyes tonight and hear the low sound of the sea, in memory or in distance, imagine that you are not hearing waves, but words. The earth is speaking. Atlantis is remembering. And in that moment, as your breathing slows to match the rhythm of the tide, you are part of the same consciousness that once dreamed beneath the ocean's surface. You are not apart from Atlantis. You are its continuation. There is a sound older than language, older than thought. It is the sound of water. Before the first heartbeat, before the first cry of life, there was movement, a rhythm, a pulse. In that rhythm, meaning began. And from that meaning, the world unfolded. Every creature that has ever lived has known this language. The whisper of rain, the murmur of streams, the deep song of the ocean. They speak in tones we do not translate, but somehow understand. Water does not speak in words. It speaks in motion, in vibration, in reflection and resonance. It carries meaning not through symbols, but through feeling. You can sense it when you stand beside a river. The rhythm slows your thoughts. You can feel it when you swim in the sea. It softens the edges of your mind. You can hear it in the silence after a storm, when the world feels rinsed clean and new. The Atlanteans may have known this language not as something outside them, but as something within them. Their bodies, like ours, were mostly water. To them, perhaps, thought itself was fluid, not linear, not confined to logic, but circular and ever-moving. Sound and water to them may have been the same force. Both are born of vibration. Both carry energy across distance. Both shape matter without violence. Some say sound once built their cities, not with machines, but with resonance. By aligning frequency with intention, they could shape stone as easily as the ocean shapes the shore. No evidence remains of this, but the idea endures, because the world itself is sculpted by vibration. Every atom hums. Every note leaves its mark upon existence. To imagine Atlantis listening to the ocean as frequency is to imagine a people fluent in the oldest language of all, the language of water. Water remembers. It holds structure, shifting with temperature, pressure, and sound. In the deep sea, layers of different salinity bend and reflect sound waves across vast distances. Whales use these pathways to send their calls halfway around the world. Through water, sound travels farther than light, wrapping around continents and echoing through the dark. If the ocean is a library, sound is its script. Every song of whale and current, every tide and ripple, writes another chapter. Perhaps Atlantis, in its final moments, wrote itself into that text. Perhaps they sent their voices into the sea, not as fear, but as memory, knowing the ocean would keep them, knowing that water does not forget. When we listen now to hydrophones in the deep, to the strange songs that rise from darkness, we may be hearing echoes of that transmission. Not words, but emotions. Not warnings, but remembrance. Serenity, sorrow, peace. Even sorrow, in water, becomes beautiful. Water turns grief into motion. It carries loss until it becomes rhythm again. Think of rain. Each drop once part of the ocean, now wandering the sky, now falling to earth again. The rain that touches your skin may have once fallen on the marble streets of Atlantis. Every storm is a memory. Every wave is a return. When you look upon the sea, it seems chaotic waves crashing, merging, breaking apart. But beneath the surface, everything is order, hidden harmonies, subtle laws, endless balance. The ocean moves like music patterns written in density and flow. Perhaps the Atlanteans learned how to hear that music clearly, how to interpret the earth's own song. Maybe their temples were not for worship, but for listening. Great halls designed for silence, where sound could ripple like prayer through stone and water. Imagine standing in such a hall, the sea pressing softly on its walls, the floor alive with vibration, your breath moving with the rhythm of the tide. Thought would change in that place. You would not think about the ocean, you would think with it. You would feel its language in your bones. And in time, you would realize your heartbeat and the waves were the same sound. That is the language of water unity without translation. When a river flows, it speaks to the stones it passes. When rain falls, it carries the sky's memory to the soil. When the ocean exhales mist, it feeds the clouds that will return as rain. Every part of the earth speaks this way, cycle to cycle, call and response, harmony through change. Maybe that is why the story of Atlantis endures. Because it, too, is a cycle of voice waiting for its echo, a message waiting to be heard again. Humanity has always been drawn to the sea. We feel that it holds something for us, not treasure, not power, but understanding. The ocean does not command. It invites, it whispers. It teaches us that wisdom is not in conquest, but in listening. Perhaps Atlantis was not destroyed at all. Perhaps it simply sank back into that conversation between water and time. When we learn to listen as they did, perhaps we will hear it again. Because water is still speaking in every wave, every raindrop, every drifting cloud. It speaks through rivers and blood, through mist and tears, through the quiet erosion of stone into sand. Its message never changes. Nothing is lost. It tells us all things are connected. Every breath, every drop, part of the same endless story. What we do to the water, we do to ourselves. The Atlanteans may have written their philosophy not in words, but in the way they lived, in how they moved with the tides, in how they listened. Their true loss was not their city, but the silence that followed. Humanity forgot how to hear the language of water, and in forgetting, we lost our balance. But the ocean still remembers. And sometimes, in the quiet between waves, it speaks the old words again, softly, patiently, waiting for us to remember. When you close your eyes and hear the sea, you are hearing the oldest voice on earth, the same one that shaped Atlantis, the same one that shaped you. It is still speaking. It will keep speaking long after we are gone, because water never stops moving, never stops remembering, never stops becoming. It is the planet's heart, its mind, its memory. And maybe, in the deepest sense, it is Atlantis itself, a civilization dissolved into rhythm, into language, into eternity. Light still moves in the deepest dark. Even miles below the surface, where sunlight cannot reach, there are glimmers, small, patient, and alive. Tiny organisms drift through the blackness, each carrying a spark of blue or green, like stars adrift in a slow-moving galaxy. Bioluminescence, one of the oldest forms of communication on Earth. A wordless language of light, spoken through the pulse of plankton, the flicker of jellyfish, the soft halo of deep-sea fish gliding through eternity. When submersibles descend into those depths, their lamps cut sharply through the water. But it is the ocean's own light that holds the real wonder. The human light intrudes. The ocean's light invites. It feels less like illumination and more like memory, as if the sea itself remembers the sun and echoes it in whispers. In that faint glow, you could imagine what Atlantis might have looked like if it still existed. Not gleaming or grand, but luminous in a gentler way. Coral spreading across marble, tendrils of kelp weaving through fallen archways, fish gliding through courtyards claimed by the sea. Perhaps the Atlantean lights still burn there, not as fire, but as life. Phosphorescent gardens, pulse in slow rhythm, powered by the same chemistry that animates the deep. If you could drift through those ruins, it would not feel lifeless. It would feel dreaming, a place half awake, suspended in time. Stone columns rise like ancient trees, mosses and anemones glow faintly on their surfaces, and the domes of temples serve as homes for translucent, unhurried creatures. Even in ruin, there is beauty. Even in silence, a heartbeat. Sometimes explorers capture shapes that seem almost architectural, symmetrical lines, terraces, right angles buried in silt. Most are geology, but the mind lingers, wondering whether some of those shapes are the sea remembering form. If the ocean could dream, would it dream of Atlantis? Perhaps it already does. Every coral reef that grows upward, every spiral pattern seen from above, all of it feels like memory rebuilding itself. The ocean creates even as it conceals. Deep beneath the Azores, ridges resemble avenues. Near Cuba's coast, sonar maps show patterns like pyramids and plazas. In the Mediterranean, near Santorini and Malta, divers find traces of ancient shorelines and sunken stone. None are confirmed as Atlantis, And perhaps that is not the point. The point is that Earth remembers. Its crust shifts, its seas rise and fall, but the story remains hidden in its bones. The ocean keeps those stories, silent but alive. In the darkness, even the smallest light becomes infinite. Explorers say that in the abyss, sound is crushed by pressure, but light becomes language. A single glimmer can illuminate an entire landscape for a heartbeat, and in that moment, something vast seems to look back. Perhaps the ocean is not empty. Perhaps it is filled with life too delicate, too deeply woven into the planet's pulse for us to detect. Humanity has always sought to illuminate the unknown. Our lights have touched the moon, Mars, even the outer planets. Yet our own ocean floor remains unseen. More than 80% of it is still unmapped. Most of Earth's surface, our own home, remains mystery. Maybe Atlantis waits there, not as a city of power, but as a place of quiet endurance beneath the pressure of time. Imagine a diver descending into the dark. The only sound is breath, slow, steady, human. The light from the submersible fades, swallowed by the blue-black around it. Then, slowly, another light appears, soft, organic, pulsing. A field of glowing organisms drifts over terraces of stone and coral. The diver moves closer, and the lights respond, not with fear, but curiosity. They seem to form patterns, as if speaking in the only alphabet water, a light. In that moment, the diver feels something ancient, not fear, but recognition. The same feeling one might have beneath stars or in a cathedral, a quiet awareness of belonging. If Atlantis exists, it may not be what we imagine, not towering or majestic, but seamlessly part of the ocean, inseparable from it. Like a seed that has become the tree, like thought that has become silence. The Atlanteans may have understood impermanence. They may have built knowing that everything returns to the earth. Their legacy was not meant to resist time, but to join it. And in that way, they succeeded. Because what other civilization has survived so completely in imagination? What other story has lasted millennia, whispered through dreams and cultures alike? Atlantis glows not on maps, but in minds. Its light has shifted from stone to memory. That, too, is bioluminescence, not of the body, but of thought. A spark moving through generations, unseen but alive. Our explorers carry that same light when they venture into the deep, curiosity and wonder. The same impulse that once built temples to the unknown still moves through us. The urge to see, the urge to understand. Even if Atlantis is never found, its spirit endures, in inquiry, in imagination. When we watch footage from deep-sea rovers brushing silt from stone, we witness more than exploration. We witness a conversation continuing, the ocean speaking through human hands. Technology is not separate from nature. It is its newest expression. The same curiosity that once moved Atlantis now moves through satellites, sensors, and microscopes. We are still reaching, still listening, still becoming. One day, we may illuminate the last dark corners of the ocean and see ourselves reflected, not as conquerors, but as participants in the same rhythm. The ocean's light is patient. It has waited for eons. It does not demand discovery. It offers invitation. When the time comes, it will reveal what it wishes to. And when it does, it will not feel like revelation. It will feel like remembering. Because Atlantis is not a secret to uncover, it is a memory to awaken. Like the glow of plankton stirred by a wave, invisible until motion brings it to life. That is what this story has always been. Light responding to movement, memory responding to curiosity. If we ever find Atlantis, it will not be discovery. It will be recognition that we, too, have always been part of the ocean's light. If Atlantis still exists, it would not be the city of legend. There would be no golden towers or domes of light, no chariots drawn by seahorses. It would be quiet, alive, A world that learned to move with the rhythm of the deep instead of against it. Imagine a civilization that survived not through resistance, but through surrender. They learned to breathe with the ocean, to listen instead of fight. Over time, their bodies changed. Skin pale as limestone, luminous beneath the faint light. Lungs able to hold breath for hours or draw air from water. Their voices softened deeper, like the songs of whales echoing through the dark. They would speak through resonance instead of words. A language of vibration that travels through water, slow, calm, and full of meaning. Each tone would carry emotion, each pause a sign of peace. Their cities would not crumble. They would grow. Halls of coral and stone shaped by patience instead of tools. They would plant fragments of coral in patterns, waiting for them to grow into arches and domes over generations. Light would flow through these places like water through veins. Gardens of glowing life would brighten the corridors, pulsing softly with the phases of the moon. Time would move differently there. Without sunrise or sunset, they would know the hours by the movement of tides and the drift of plankton. Their seasons would be marked by the slow breathing of the earth above, the rumble of storms, the song of migrating whales, the trembling of the sea floor. They would be listeners of time, keepers of the planet's oldest memory. Perhaps they have watched us, seen our ships crossing above them, our lights shining across the night sky. They would know that we are searching again, that we remember. But they would not rise. They would remain silent, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. They would know that silence is sacred. Their civilization would not depend on machines or metal. They would shape life instead. Coral turned into tools, light woven into living art, energy drawn from tides and heat from the earth's breath. Their art would not be painted, but grown. Coral arranged to bloom in color when touched by light. Their music would not be played, but felt. The hum of water through stone, the song of whales, the slow rhythm of current. They would think in waves, not in words. Ideas shared like ripples, passed through touch, sound, and empathy. Knowledge would not be stored in objects, but carried in living memory. They would live with patience. The ocean would have taught them that wisdom grows in stillness, not haste. They would measure time in harmony, not in progress. If you could stand in one of their halls, you might see figures moving slowly through the half-light. Calm faces, soft eyes, gestures deliberate and graceful. Each movement a part of the rhythm that holds their world together. They would not rush. They would not conquer. They would live in balance. In their world, there would be no war, no greed, no borders. The ocean itself would feed and protect them. Life would flow in cycles. Food, light, energy, all part of the same breathing system. Their belief would be simple. Gratitude. Every current a teacher, every silence a song. They would remember that the sea is not separate. It is the beginning of everything. When they look upward, toward the faint shimmer of the surface, they would not see distance. They would see memory, a reminder of the world that forgot how to breathe in rhythm with the earth. Sometimes they might send signals, slow pulses of light rising through the water. Fishermen would call them mysteries. Scientists would call them data. But to them, they would be greetings, small reminders that they still exist, that they still remember. They would tell their children stories about the time before, when sea and sky were one, when humans chose the air and left the water behind. They stayed to keep the memory of balance alive. They would speak of us, the surface dwellers, full of light, full of ambition, full of noise. They would not judge. They would understand. They too once tried to master the world, until they learned that mastery was an illusion. Now they live in harmony with the tides. Their buildings breathe. Their cities drift. Their lives move in circles, not lines. They would know peace, the kind that comes from acceptance, without conquest, without fear of loss, without the illusion of control. If you were to drift into their world, the light would dim. The water would grow still. Slowly, shapes would appear, towers, arches, spirals, not ruins, but living structures, everything breathing together. You would see movement among them, slow, graceful figures gliding through blue light. They would not flee. They would not chase. They would simply watch. And in their eyes, you would see something familiar, recognition. Perhaps they already know what we are only beginning to learn, that survival comes from change, not strength, that wisdom is quiet, that endurance, not power, defines the greatest civilizations. Maybe they are still there, waiting deep below, patient as the sea itself, not lost, not forgotten, just waiting for us to remember how to listen. If Atlantis still exists, it is not a mystery to solve. It is a promise that peace is possible, that balance is real, that the deep still remembers harmony. The ocean has always been our mirror. In its depths, we see both our fragility and our potential. And one day, when we look long enough into that reflection, we might see Atlantis looking back, not as legend, but as truth. The ocean never forgets. It holds the memory of everything that has ever touched it, the footsteps of ancient sailors, the bones of forgotten beasts, the whispers of civilizations that have long drifted into myth. Every wave carries echoes of the past, rolling them gently through time. And when we listen, truly listen, we can almost hear it, the deep, slow heartbeat of the world. Atlantis lives there, not as a ruin or a secret city of treasure, but as a feeling, a pulse that moves through the deep, a reminder that the earth has known countless worlds before ours, and will know countless more when we are gone. When we look across the horizon, we are looking at both the beginning and the end. The sea was here long before we named it, long before we understood it, and it will remain when our cities fade back into dust. And yet, it is not a place of endings. It is a place of continuity. If you listen closely to the waves, you may hear the rhythm of ages, the slow procession of tides repeating the same truth, that nothing is ever truly lost. Everything returns. Everything transforms. That is the real story of Atlantis. It was never about a vanished empire or punishment from the gods. It was about cycles, the rise and fall of balance, the eternal dance between creation and forgetting. Plato's tale was never meant as prophecy or warning alone. It was a meditation on human nature, on how easily we drift from harmony when we lose sight of what connects us. Perhaps Atlantis did exist, a great island, rich in wisdom, swallowed by time. But even if it never did, the story remains true. Because every civilization carries a little of Atlantis within it, the brilliance, the beauty, and the fragility of wanting to master what should be loved. The ocean reminds us that mastery is illusion. It does not bow to will. It moves to the rhythm of its own heart. It is patient, enduring, infinite. It teaches not through words, but through example, by showing that change is not destruction, but transformation. Maybe Atlantis was not destroyed. Maybe it simply changed form. Maybe it became part of the sea itself, its knowledge diffused into coral and current, its spirit spread through every drop of salt water that touches our shores. And so, when we walk beside the ocean, we walk beside memory. The same water that laps at our feet once touched the stones of ancient cities, the sails of long-lost ships, the faces of those who dreamed before us. The sea connects all time. It is the earth's bloodstream, slow, vast, unending. When you stand at the edge of the water and feel the waves pull gently at the sand, you are feeling the same rhythm that shaped Atlantis, the same tide that carved islands, that lifted mountains, that carried our ancestors across unknown worlds, the same tide that whispers, even now, beneath the deepest silence. We live in an age of rediscovery. Our machines scan the ocean floor, mapping, measuring, revealing. But no matter how advanced our instruments become, There will always remain something we cannot touch, the quiet truth that mystery itself is sacred. Atlantis endures because we need it to, because in the story of its loss, we find a mirror of ourselves, a reminder that greatness without humility leads to imbalance, that wisdom without compassion turns to pride. And yet, the story also gives us hope, because even after the fall, even after the waves reclaimed it, Atlantis still glows in imagination. It was never truly drowned, only transformed into memory, waiting to rise again within us. Maybe the real Atlantis is not beneath the sea, but within the human spirit, the part of us that longs for harmony, for beauty, for peace. It is what we seek when we look toward the horizon, what we dream of when we speak of lost worlds. It is the home we have been trying to return to since the beginning. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the sea at dusk. The last light of the sun fades into the horizon, and the water turns to silver. The wind softens, the waves slow. Beneath the surface, life moves in calm procession. The slow drift of plankton, the graceful arcs of rays, the distant songs of whales echoing like prayers. And deep below, in the quiet heart of the ocean, something ancient stirs. Not movement, but presence. A stillness so complete it feels alive. Perhaps that is Atlantis, not a city, but a consciousness. A way of being that never truly died, waiting for us to remember it. If we were to listen long enough, to breathe with the rhythm of the waves, maybe we could hear its voice again. Not in language, but in feeling. A warmth that says, "You are home." Because that is what Atlantis has always symbolized. Homecoming. The return to balance. The return to belonging. The ocean does not keep secrets out of cruelty. It keeps them as a gesture of love, to remind us that not everything must be known, that wonder itself is a form of truth. To know everything is to end the dream. And Atlantis, above all, is a dream worth keeping alive. Some nights, when the sea is still and the stars reflect upon the surface, you can almost believe you're looking down into another world, a mirror world, luminous and vast. And if you watch long enough, you might see lights moving beneath the water, like lanterns drifting through memory. Maybe they are reflections of life we have yet to discover. Maybe they are reminders that the story continues, that even in darkness there is always light. The ocean hums softly, carrying the voices of countless ages. It tells us that everything we build, everything we love, returns to it in the end, not lost, but changed. Just as the rain becomes river, and river becomes sea, and sea becomes cloud again. Atlantis is part of that cycle. It is not gone. It is only waiting, waiting for us to understand that the ocean is not a boundary, but a bridge. That what we call lost may only be resting. That what we seek has always been within reach, if only we learn to move at the pace of tides. So when you lie down tonight, and the sound of the ocean plays softly in your mind, imagine that far below, a city still breathes, not in marble, but in coral and memory. Its lights flicker like stars in water. Its songs ripple through the deep, calling not for discovery, but for remembrance. And as you drift toward sleep, remember this. The earth is ancient, but it is also alive. It remembers every civilization, every thought, every story whispered into its winds. Atlantis is one of those stories, eternal, luminous, reborn with every wave that touches the shore. The myth is not a loss, it is a promise. That what we build in harmony endures beyond time. That what we love becomes part of the world itself. That even in silence, there is memory. Even in darkness, there is light. The ocean breathes, and in that breath, Atlantis lives. And still, the ocean moves. Long after our voices fade, after our cities dissolve into sand and coral, the waves continue their endless pilgrimage across the face of the earth. They roll over places that once were land, whisper through valleys that once held rivers, and hum above mountains now buried beneath their weight. In those movements, lies a lesson older than language, that life is not meant to be held, but to flow, that everything which seems lost is only changing form. Atlantis teaches us that too, that even a civilization of light and learning can vanish and yet remain, transformed into something quieter, something vast. Perhaps this is how the world heals what becomes too proud, by folding it gently back into itself, the way the sea smooths a jagged stone. In the end, nothing is wasted. The marble of temples becomes sand. The sand becomes the foundation for coral. The coral becomes home to countless lives. And in that way, the story continues, not as tragedy, but as renewal. The ocean does not mourn what it takes. It keeps. It nurtures. It transforms. If Atlantis still rests beneath the waves, it is not buried in sorrow. It is dreaming. Its towers are reefs now. Its halls are cradles for life. Its once shining streets are paths for fish and drifting plankton, for small creatures carrying light in their fragile bodies. The ocean remembers, but it remembers with love. It does not cling to what was. It allows everything to become what it must. And maybe that is the deeper truth of this myth. Not that a world was lost, but that a world learned to return home. For we too are of the sea. Our blood carries its salt. Our hearts beat with rhythms shaped by tides. The oceans inside us still answer to the pull of the moon. When we gaze at the horizon, it isn't curiosity that calls us. It is memory. Something within us recognizes that endless blue, that sound of the world breathing. It reminds us of where we began. It reminds us of what we are. We build walls and roads and towers. We carve borders into maps. But beneath all of it, the ocean remains. It unites everything. It erases no one. It connects all. It is the only true continuity on Earth. When the first forms of life emerged, it was there. When the continents drifted and collided, it watched. When humanity first stood on the shore and wondered at its vastness, it listened. And when we are gone, it will still move, calm, eternal, luminous. There is peace in knowing that. If you stand by the sea at night and let the wind brush softly against your skin, you can almost feel it, that endless exchange between earth and sky, between the world that breathes air and the one that breathes water. It is not two worlds. It is one, seen from different depths. Perhaps the Atlanteans never truly left. Perhaps their spirit continues in every person who listens, who watches, who remembers the ocean not as a boundary, but as home, in the fisherman who knows the tides by heart, in the diver who descends not to conquer, but to understand, in the dreamer who closes their eyes and imagines marble gardens swaying beneath the sea. They live on in us, in every act of reverence, in every moment of wonder. And maybe, someday, when we learn once again to live in balance, to take only what we need and give back more than we take, the ocean will answer. Maybe it will lift its veil, and the city beneath will rise, not in stone, but in spirit. A new Atlantis, not of the past, but of the future. A world where humanity remembers its place in the whole, where science and spirit walk side by side, where knowledge is not used to dominate, but to heal, where we finally understand that the earth is not ours, we are hers. And when that day comes, it will not feel like discovery. It will feel like remembering something we have always known, that we belong here, that we are part of everything. Atlantis is that remembrance, the dream of unity that humankind has carried for thousands of years, waiting to awaken again. The sea keeps the dream safe. Beneath the pressure, beneath the silence, beneath the miles of darkness, it guards that small, steady light. And when we are quiet enough, when the noise of the surface fades, we can feel it calling softly back to us. So breathe, slowly. Let your thoughts drift like silt through water. Let the sound of the ocean carry them. Somewhere deep below, a city still glows, not in gold, not in fire, but in peace. Its light flickers through coral branches, dances along ancient stone. It does not ask to be found. It only asks to be remembered. For to remember is to awaken the part of us that belongs to the sea. The part that knows how to listen, how to wait, how to move gently through the world. We are the surface dwellers, yes, but we are also the children of the depths. And perhaps the ocean, patient as ever, is waiting for us to come home. Until then, it sings, through waves, through wind, through the heartbeat of the earth. And each time you listen to that song, you are hearing Atlantis, not the city, but the idea, the echo, the hope. That harmony is possible, that loss is not the end, that everything we are searching for is already within us, waiting to be remembered. The tide rises, the tide falls, the story continues, the ocean breathes, and in that breath, the world dreams. The sea is older than memory, older than language, older than the light that falls across its surface. And somewhere within its depths, beyond the reach of time, the story of Atlantis still drifts, not as ruin, not as loss, but as remembrance. Every tide that touches the shore carries a fragment of that story. You can feel it in the pull of the waves, in the hush between heartbeats, in the way the horizon never quite ends. The ocean remembers everything we forget, the sound of civilizations fading, the shimmer of dreams half buried in sand, the delicate pattern of balance that once held the world together. When we speak of Atlantis, we are not only recalling a lost island, we are remembering ourselves, the part of humanity that once listened to the earth instead of speaking over it, that once built not for dominion, but for harmony. Perhaps that is why the myth endures, because it is not a story of destruction, but of return. Every age must learn its lesson in its own way. For the people of Atlantis, it was pride, the belief that wisdom could exist without humility. For us, it may be forgetfulness, the quiet erosion of wonder in a world too loud to hear its own heartbeat. But the sea is patient. It waits. It teaches through rhythm. It reminds through silence. Somewhere below the waves, the old city sleeps, not as punishment, but as promise. Its towers are gardens now. Its streets are rivers of light. Its marble walls are covered in coral, each one a living testament to transformation. The ocean did not erase Atlantis. It completed it. It carried the city back into the cycle of life from which it was born. And so, Atlantis became not a tragedy, but a truth, that nothing is ever truly lost. Not cities, not civilizations, not even dreams. When we look at the sea, we are looking at the memory of creation itself. Every current is a story, every drop a witness. The same waters that swallowed Atlantis flow through our veins. The salt in our blood is the salt of ancient oceans. We are, in every sense, made of the same memory we seek. Perhaps that is the final gift of the myth, to remind us that we are not separate from the world we tell stories about. We are its continuation. The philosophers were right. Every end contains its beginning. When Atlantis sank, it did not vanish, it changed form. The people who survived carried its knowledge into new lands, its echoes into new cultures. The temples may have fallen, but the ideas endured. Balance, reverence, the circle between human and nature. These ideas became the foundation of mythologies across continents, whispered through generations until they became our collective instinct. And today, as we stand again at the edge of our own tide, technological, environmental, spiritual, the memory rises once more, asking quietly, have we learned? We build towers that touch the sky, networks that span the globe, machines that speak with voices of light. We map the stars, split the atom, decode the genome. We have become masters of creation in ways even Plato could not have imagined. And yet, beneath all this brilliance, the same truth hums, that balance is fragile, and the earth remembers. Perhaps that is why the story of Atlantis feels timeless. It is the cycle of all civilizations, curiosity, creation, mastery, forgetting, return. It is the breath of history itself. Inhale, exhale, rise, fall. The ocean has seen it countless times. It has drowned empires greater than imagination, and it has birthed new worlds from the sediment of the old. And still it waits, as it always has, for us to remember how to listen. Maybe one day, far from now, when the noise of our age has quieted, when our own towers have faded back into the soil, another generation will walk along a different shore. They will look out across the sea and feel that same familiar pull, that sense that something sacred sleeps beneath the waves. And they will give it a name, just as we did. Perhaps they will call it Atlantis. Perhaps they will call it Earth, because in truth, the two have never been separate. The legend of Atlantis is the legend of the planet itself. A world that gives, withdraws, and renews. A world that builds beauty only to transform it again, endlessly. There is comfort in that. To know that even when everything we know dissolves, the essence remains, reshaped, reborn. That the sea does not destroy. It changes. That loss is not an ending, but a movement into another form of life. If you listen closely tonight, beyond the sound of your own breath, beyond the whisper of the wind, you might hear it. The soft pulse of water against the shore. The quiet rhythm of something vast and alive beneath your feet. That is the voice of the deep, calling not for discovery, but for remembrance. Atlantis is not waiting to be found. It is waiting to be understood. The city beneath the sea is not a relic, but a reflection. A mirror held up to every civilization that dares to forget where it came from. It reminds us that power without balance collapses, that beauty without humility fades, that wisdom without silence is incomplete. And yet, it also reminds us that every fall carries within it the seed of renewal, the coral that grows from broken marble, the reef that blossoms from ruin, the light that still moves in the deepest dark. So when you think of Atlantis, do not picture a city lost forever. Picture a city still alive, moving slowly beneath the waves, glowing softly with the breath of new life. Picture the ocean, not as a grave, but as a cradle, holding what was until the world is ready to remember again. The myth endures because it is not only about the past. It is about what we still might become. If Atlantis teaches us anything, it is that greatness lies not in what we build, but in how gently we live within the rhythm of creation. That the truest wisdom is quiet. That harmony is not a goal, but a practice, one that must be learned again with every tide. And so, the story closes where it began, with the sound of waves, the breath of the sea, and the light that still moves in the deepest dark. Atlantis is gone, and yet it is everywhere, in the shimmer of plankton, in the spiral of shells, in the dreams of those who still listen for the voice beneath the surface. The ocean has kept its promise. It remembers. And through its memory, so do we.